I am Zuri, 32 years old, and a year after my brutal divorce, my own sister spotted me at the hospital. She smirked, adjusting the strap of her designer bag, and asked if I was still sitting around completely alone. Then she lowered her voice and delivered what she thought would be the final blow. "Your ex-husband did well leaving you," she whispered. "He has a son now with the woman you used to call your best friend." My parents stood right beside her, saying absolutely nothing to defend me. I did not cry or run away. I just smiled, looked her dead in the eye, and asked, "Is that what she told you?" 5 minutes later, my ex walked through the hospital, sliding doors, and my sister's face lost every ounce of its color. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Atlanta General Hospital was freezing, but the chill radiating through my bones had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I was sitting in the outpatient lounge waiting on routine lab work for my annual physical. I was minding my own business, scrolling through financial reports on my phone, when the heavy scent of expensive floral perfume hit me before anyone even spoke. "Look who is sitting all by herself again." I looked up from my screen. Standing over me was my older sister Chantel, draped head to toe in labels that screamed her husband's old money wealth. Flanking her like royal bodyguards were our parents, Pastor Thomas, and First Lady Brenda. They were the absolute royalty of our local church community, projecting an image of total moral perfection to everyone who paid tithes. Yet here they were cornering their youngest daughter in a hospital waiting room just to twist a knife in my back. "Hello to you too, Chantel," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even. "Mom, Dad, are you all here for a checkup or just a coordinated ambush?" My father adjusted his tailored suit jacket, his face hardening into that familiar expression of profound disappointment he always reserved just for me. "We are visiting a sick parishioner, Zuri. Do not flatter yourself. But seeing you sitting here alone a full year after Jamal left you is truly a sad sight to behold." I stood up, making sure I was at eye level with my sister. My tailored slacks and silk blouse were understated, but I carried myself with the precision and confidence of the senior forensic accountant I had become. "I am waiting for my lab results, Dad. Not that anyone bothered to ask." Chantel let out a sharp, breathless laugh that sounded exactly like breaking glass. "Oh, please. You have always been so defensive and bitter. I guess being the divorced, abandoned sister is finally taking its toll on you. You know Jamal really did well when he walked out on you. In fact, he is doing better than ever." She leaned in close, her eyes glittering with malicious joy. "He has a son now, Zuri. A beautiful baby boy. And guess who the mother is, Tiara? You remember your best friend, right? The one you practically forced him to hire." The words were meant to destroy me. Chantel had spent her entire life trying to tear me down, punishing me for outshining her without even trying. When I earned a full academic ride to Spelman College, she threw a fit that lasted an entire summer. She had barely scraped by in high school and had to rely heavily on our father pulling every string and calling in every church favor just to get her admitted into a local state university. She never forgave me for earning what she felt entitled to by birthright. She believed that because she was the pastor's perfect, beautiful daughter, the world should simply hand her everything on a silver platter. When I secured a highly competitive job at a top accounting firm, while she was still trying to figure out her life, her resentment turned into active sabotage. My mother, Brenda, placed a manicured hand over her heart, shaking her head as if I were a tragedy she had to endure on a daily basis. "You need to prey on your bitterness and your barrenness, Zuri. A woman's true purpose is to build a family, not bury her nose in spreadsheets and bank statements." Chantel knows how to keep a man happy and maintain a respectable home with Harrison. You could learn a lot from your sister instead of driving good men away. I felt a familiar knot of anger tightening in my chest, but years of auditing complex financial frauds had taught me the immense value of absolute emotional control. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at Chantel's smug expression, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched her designer purse. Good men do not walk out on their wives to sleep with their best friends. Mom, I replied smoothly. But I suppose in our family keeping up appearances is far more important than actual loyalty. Chantel rolled her eyes, scoffing loudly to ensure the other people in the waiting room could hear her. You are just jealous because Harrison gives me everything I want, and you could not even keep a man who had nothing when you met him. Jamal upgraded Zuri. You should just accept reality and move on. I studied her face. There was something frantic behind her eyes, a nervous energy that did not match her confident words. As a forensic accountant, my entire career was built on noticing the things people tried desperately to hide. Chantel was terrified of something. I could see it in the way she kept checking her phone, the way she shifted her weight from foot to foot. Growing up in our affluent neighborhood, my parents made sure everyone saw us as the picture-perfect family. My father commanded a congregation of over 3,000 people. He was a man who demanded respect and absolute obedience. My mother was his enforcer. She curated our lives down to the smallest detail. We wore matching dresses on Sundays, smiled for the church photographers, and never spoke about the tension simmering beneath the surface of our home. But behind closed doors, the hierarchy was painfully clear. Chantel was the golden child. When I chose to focus on academics, spending my high school weekends studying complex math and accounting principles, Chantel was out partying, running up my parents' credit cards, and expecting the world to bow at her feet. My parents rewarded her behavior constantly. When she wrecked her first car, my father bought her a new one the very next week. When I asked for help paying for a specialized accounting seminar, my mother told me to get a part-time job and stop being so demanding. The disparity only widened as we became adults. I earned my degree, passed my licensing exams, and fought my way into a high-level position at one of the top financial forensic firms in the country. I spent my days tracking down hidden assets, exposing corporate fraud, and unraveling the lies that wealthy people told to protect their money. I built a life of absolute independence. But to my parents, my career was just a distraction from what they believed was my true purpose, which was serving a husband and producing grandchildren to complete their family portrait. When Jamal and I got married, my parents were thrilled not because they loved him, but because I was finally conforming to their expectations. Jamal was a charismatic but financially illiterate man who always had a new scheme to get rich quick. I ended up paying off his massive credit card debts and funding his graduate degree, believing that a partnership meant supporting each other. But the moment he secured his degree, he started changing. The late nights, the hidden text messages, the sudden distance. And then exactly 1 year ago, he packed his bags and walked out, claiming he needed to find himself. I had spent the last 12 months quietly rebuilding my peace. I focused on my work, got promoted to senior auditor, and bought a stunning high-rise condo overlooking the city. I did not complain. I did not beg for him back. I simply cut my losses and moved forward. But my family refused to let me heal in peace. They took every opportunity to remind me of my failure, using my divorce as proof that my independence had ruined my life. "Is that what Tiara told you?" I asked, letting a cold, knowing smile touch the corners of my mouth. "Or is that the story you paid Jamal to tell everyone so you could pretend you had nothing to do with it?" Chantel's smirk faltered instantly. Her eyes darted nervously toward our parents, then back to me. "What are you talking about, you crazy girl? I do not talk to your broke ex-husband." But before she could construct another lie, the automatic sliding doors of the hospital lobby hissed open. Footsteps echoed loudly and rapidly against the linoleum floor. It was Jamal. He did not look like a glowing new father celebrating his growing family. His shirt was wrinkled, sweat beaded heavily on his forehead, and his eyes were wild with sheer panic. He marched straight past me without a single glance of recognition and grabbed Chantel violently by the arm. Chantel shrieked, trying to pull away, but his grip was like a vice. My father stepped forward immediately, his pastoral composure breaking into raw anger. "Get your hands off my daughter right now, Jamal," he demanded, looking around frantically to see if any of his congregants were witnessing this embarrassing scene. Jamal completely ignored the pastor. His chest heaved as he glared down at my perfect sister. The wire transfer bounced Chantel. He hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "You owe me the last $20,000 of our deal, or I am telling Harrison everything. Today. Right now." The hospital waiting room seemed to stop spinning. The ambient noise of intercom announcements and nurses walking by faded into total silence. Chantel's face lost every ounce of its color. She looked like she might pass out right there on the polished floor. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, completely paralyzed by the sudden eruption of hostility. I stood up taller, my mind racing as the puzzle pieces slammed into place. My divorce was not a tragedy of a failed marriage. It was a paid hit. My own sister had financed the destruction of my life. "Deal." I stepped forward, putting myself right next to them. My voice was dangerously calm, cutting through Jamal's panic like a scalpel. "What $70,000 deal, Jamal?" Jamal froze. He turned his head slowly, as if just realizing I had been standing there the entire time. The color drained from his face to match Chantel's. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at me, then at Chantel, then at my parents who were staring at him in utter shock. Chantel tried to physically pull him toward the exit, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve. "Shut up," she whispered frantically. "Shut up and get out of here. I will fix it. Just leave." But I was not about to let him leave. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and held it up, making sure they both saw the red recording icon blinking on the screen. "No, Jamal," I said, taking another step closer. "Do not leave. Please tell me more about this wire transfer. Tell me why my sister owes you $20,000. And more importantly, tell me what Harrison is going to find out if she does not pay up." My father finally found his voice, stepping between me and Jamal. "Zuri, put that phone away immediately. We will not have this family's business aired out in a public hospital lobby. This is a private matter." I kept the camera pointed squarely at Chantel's terrified face. "A private matter, Dad?" I asked, not breaking eye contact with my sister. "My husband leaving me for my best friend was very public. You made sure the entire congregation knew about my failure. So I think it is only fair that we handle this in public too. Now speak, Jamal, or I am sending this recording straight to Harrison myself." The automatic sliding doors hissed apart, letting a thick wave of humid Atlanta air wash into the aggressively air-conditioned lobby. Heavy, uneven footsteps slapped against the polished linoleum. Jamal stormed through the entrance, and he did not look like a glowing new father celebrating his growing family. He did not look like a man who had successfully upgraded his life. He looked completely unhinged. His expensive tailored suit, the one I had undoubtedly paid for during our marriage, was rumpled and stained with sweat. His tie was missing, his collar was undone, and his eyes darted around the lobby with a frantic, hunted energy. This was the man Chantel had just spent the last 5 minutes praising. This was the man my mother had just used as a weapon to highlight my supposed barrenness and failure as a wife. Yet standing there under the harsh fluorescent lights, he looked like a cornered animal. He marched directly toward our cluster of chairs, completely blind to my presence. His focus was locked entirely on my sister. Chantel stood frozen, her smug smile lingering for a fraction of a second before sheer confusion took over. Before my mother could offer a theatrical greeting, Jamal closed the distance and grabbed Chantel violently by the forearm. His fingers dug deeply into the pristine silk of her designer blouse. The wire transfer bounced. "Chantel," Jamal hissed. His voice was a harsh, ragged whisper, but in the quiet acoustics of the waiting area, every single syllable echoed perfectly. "You owe me the last $20,000 of our deal. You need to fix it right now, or I am going straight to Harrison and telling him absolutely everything." The silence that followed was absolute. Chantel's face lost every ounce of its vibrant color, draining into a sickly, chalky gray. The heavy designer handbag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Her mouth opened, but only a strangled, terrified gasp escaped. She looked around wildly, panic completely shattering her carefully cultivated image of the untouchable pastor's daughter. She was terrified. Not of Jamal, but of the name he had just weaponized. Harrison. Her old money, highly respected, strictly principled white husband who despised deception above all else. My mother let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying instantly to the diamond cross resting at her collarbone. Instead of questioning why her former son-in-law was grabbing her eldest daughter Yvonne, immediately spun around to scan the room. She was checking to see if any members of their congregation were sitting nearby, instinctively prioritizing the church's reputation over her daughter's physical safety. My father, Pastor DeAndre, stepped forward. His pastoral warmth vanished instantly, replaced by the ruthless, commanding authority he used to run his church board. "Get your hands off her right this second, Jamal," my father ordered. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble designed to intimidate without drawing a crowd. He wedged his broad shoulders between them, aggressively swatting Jamal's hand away from Chantel's arm. "We do not air our private family business in a public lobby. You are embarrassing yourself, and more importantly, you are compromising the standing of this family. Lower your voice and fix your posture before I have hospital security throw you out into the street." But Jamal was entirely past the point of caring about my father's community standing. This was a man who could barely balance a checking account without my help during our marriage, and now he was clearly drowning in a financial scheme entirely out of his depth. He shoved my father's arm away completely, ignoring the unwritten rule that no one ever challenged the pastor in public. "I do not care about your precious reputation, DeAndre." Jamal shot back, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "I care about the fact that my bank account is sitting in the negative." The bank flagged the transaction. She promised a clean $70,000 for me to walk away and play along with this ridiculous narrative. I did my part. I filed the divorce papers. I took the blame. Now I want the rest of my money. The words hung suspended in the sterile air. My forensic accountant brain automatically took over, stripping away the emotional shock and immediately dissecting the raw data Jamal had just practically screamed into the lobby. A bounced wire transfer, a $70,000 total payout, a deal to walk away and play a narrative. The realization hit me with the devastating force of a freight train. My divorce had not been a tragedy of a failed relationship. It had been a highly funded, meticulously orchestrated theatrical production. My own sister had literally purchased the destruction of my marriage. The numbers spun rapidly in my head, linking together patterns I was trained to find in corporate audits. $70,000 in liquid cash was not something Chantel kept in her personal checking account. Harrison managed their major assets with strict old money oversight. If a wire transfer bounced, it meant a hold had been placed on the routing number, likely a fraud alert triggered by an unauthorized signature or suspicious activity. Chantel had promised Jamal the money to leave me using Tiara and a fake baby as the ultimate distraction to humiliate me and ensure I never dug deeper into the real reason he left. They had manufactured my rock bottom just to elevate Chantel's status as the golden child, ensuring I remained the family scapegoat forever. I did not cry. I did not scream. I stepped smoothly around my father, planting myself directly in Jamal's line of sight. My posture was flawless, my expression utterly detached. I looked at the man I had spent years supporting financially, the man who had lied to my face for months, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical superiority. "Deal?" I asked. My voice was deadly calm, possessing a chilling clarity that instantly cut through the mounting hysteria of my parents. "What $70,000 deal, Jamal?" Jamal completely froze. His entire body went rigid as his eyes finally locked onto mine. He had been so entirely consumed by his financial panic that he had not realized I was standing less than 5 feet away the entire time. The remaining bravado drained out of him, leaving him looking hollow, pathetic, and utterly terrified. Chantel lunged forward, grabbing his wrist with both hands, trying with all her might to physically drag him toward the automatic sliding doors. "Shut up!" she hissed, her voice cracking into a desperate, high-pitched whine. "Shut your mouth and walk away right now. I will fix the bank issue. Just get out of here before you ruin everything." But Jamal remained paralyzed, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights as I slowly raised my phone, the screen recording every single second of their spectacular unraveling. Chantel did not wait for Jamal to find his voice. She grabbed the collar of his rumpled shirt and practically dragged him backward toward the automatic doors. He stumbled, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the polished floor, completely yielding to her frantic pulling. They burst through the glass doors and out into the suffocating humidity of the Atlanta afternoon. I did not hesitate. I kept my phone raised, the recording icon blinking a steady, relentless red, and followed them right out into the glaring sunlight. The heat radiating off the asphalt parking lot was oppressive, but the cold precision settling over my mind made me immune to it. I watched Chantel shove Jamal toward a sleek black BMW parked illegally in the fire lane. It was a brand new model, and I knew for an absolute fact Jamal could not afford the lease on his own. That car was a prop just like his entire post-divorce lifestyle. I closed the distance between us before Jamal could unlock the doors. Chantel spun around to face me, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as she tried to block my path. She threw her shoulders back desperately, trying to summon the haughty, untouchable persona she wore every Sunday in the front pew of our father's church. "You need to stop this right now," Zuri Chantel demanded, her voice shrill and breathy. "You are completely delusional." "You heard him wrong. Jamal is just having financial issues with his business, and he came to me for a loan because he knows Harrison and I are blessed to be in a position to help. You are making up this insane conspiracy theory because you are bitter. You have been looking for an excuse to hate me ever since Jamal realized he could not stand being married to a miserable woman. Put that phone away and stop embarrassing yourself." I did not even blink. I looked right past her designer sunglasses and her trembling jaw, focusing entirely on the man cowering against the driver's side door of his leased car. I completely ignored my sister. She was a liability trying to control a narrative that had already collapsed. I stepped around her, pressing Jamal between my body and the hot metal of his vehicle. "I am going to ask you one time, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice low and lethal. My phone was pointed squarely at his sweating face. "I am a senior forensic auditor. I track missing millions across international borders for a living. Do you honestly believe a fake consulting firm and a bounced $20,000 wire transfer are going to take me more than 5 minutes to unravel? You have exactly 10 seconds to tell me why my sister is paying you $70,000, or I am sending this video to Harrison. And then I am sending it to the IRS to ask them about your sudden undocumented income." Jamal swallowed hard. His eyes darted wildly toward Chantel, searching for a lifeline, but she was useless, gasping for air and glancing nervously toward the hospital entrance. Jamal was cornered. He possessed absolutely no loyalty, only a desperate need for self-preservation. The pressure broke him instantly. "Okay," Jamal shouted, holding his hands up in surrender. "Okay, just put the phone down, Zuri. Please, I am broke. The business failed before it even started. The bank flagged the account this morning and I have nothing left." I did not lower the phone. "Tell me about the deal, Jamal." He let out a ragged breath, swiping a hand across his forehead. His confession spilled out in a rushed, frantic torrent, completely destroying the illusion of our past. "I never wanted to struggle, Zuri. You know that. I wanted the lifestyle, the cars, the respect. But you made me work for it. You made me budget. I married you because you were the safe, smart girl. You paid my way through my master's degree. You paid off my credit cards. You were reliable. But reliable does not make you rich quickly." He pointed a shaking finger at Chantel, throwing her to the wolves without a second thought. "She came to me a month before I filed the divorce papers. She knew I was drowning in hidden debt again. She offered me a shortcut. $70,000 in cash. All I had to do was walk away from you, file the papers, and make sure the fallout was spectacular." I stared at him, my analytical mind processing the sheer cruelty of the transaction. "You took a payout to ruin our marriage. I took a payout to survive." Jamal shot back defensively, his voice cracking. "She wanted you humiliated. She hated that everyone at church kept talking about your promotion at the accounting firm, about how independent you were. She told me I had to make it look incredibly painful for you. That is why we brought Tiara into it. Chantel paid Tiara $10,000 out of her own pocket to pretend we were sleeping together, to pretend the baby was mine." It was all designed to make you look like the pathetic, barren wife who drove her husband into the arms of her best friend. Chantel needed you to look like a complete failure so she could remain the golden child. The gravity of his words hung in the humid air. My best friend. My husband. My own flesh and blood. They had sat around a table and priced out my dignity. They had manufactured my rock bottom just to protect Chantel's fragile ego. And Jamal had sold me out for the price of a mid-tier luxury car. Before I could ask about the origin of the funds, the heavy thud of rapid footsteps approached from behind. "What in the name of God is going on out here?" a voice shrieked. I did not even have time to turn around before my mother, First Lady Yvonne, descended upon us like a hurricane of righteous fury. She had left my father inside to handle the congregants and marched out to protect her favorite child. She did not ask what Jamal had just confessed. She did not ask why her eldest daughter was hyperventilating against a parked car. She saw me holding my phone recording her golden child in a state of distress, and she went straight on the offensive. Yvonne lunged forward. Her hand swung out in a violent sweeping arc, striking my wrist with incredible force. The impact sent my phone flying through the air. It hit the sun-baked asphalt with a sharp, sickening clatter, skidding under the front tire of Jamal's car. "Have you lost your absolute mind, Zuri?" my mother screamed, her face contorted with rage. Her perfectly styled hair trembled as she pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "You are a spiteful, jealous, bitter woman. You cannot stand the fact that your sister is blessed. You cannot stand that she has a loving husband and a beautiful life while you are left with nothing. You are out here harassing this man, trying to destroy your sister's marriage out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. You are an embarrassment to this family." Chantel immediately burst into theatrical tears, leaning against our mother's shoulder, playing the terrified victim flawlessly. Yvonne wrapped a protective arm around her, glaring at me as if I were a stranger who had just assaulted them. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. I looked at the sister who had purchased my destruction. I looked at the man who had gladly accepted the check. I felt absolutely no emotional damage. The desperate need for their approval, the lingering desire to be loved by them, evaporated into the thick Atlanta heat. They were no longer my family. They were just poorly constructed liabilities. I calmly bent down, reaching under the edge of the BMW tire. My fingers brushed the smooth glass of my phone. I pulled it out and turned it over. The heavy-duty case had absorbed the impact. The screen was completely unbroken, and the recording icon was still blinking steadily, having captured every single second of Jamal's confession and my mother's violent reaction. I tapped the screen, saved the file, and uploaded it directly to my encrypted cloud server in one seamless motion. I stood back up, smoothing out an invisible crease in my silk trousers. I looked directly into my mother's furious, hateful eyes. "I do not need to destroy her marriage, Mom," I said, my voice ringing with absolute chilling certainty. "She just did it herself." I turned my back on them, walking purposefully toward my own car, leaving them standing in the blistering heat with the sudden terrifying realization that they no longer had any control over me. The drive back to the city was a blur of Atlanta traffic, but my mind was operating with the cold precision of a machine. I had left them standing in the suffocating heat of the hospital parking lot, stripped of their power and their false narratives. I did not drive to a cramped, lonely apartment to weep over my shattered marriage. I drove straight to Buckhead, pulling my luxury sedan into the private gated garage of my high-rise building. I rode the private elevator up to the 30th floor and stepped directly into my home. My parents loved to spin a tragic narrative for their congregation about my life. They painted me as the struggling, bitter divorcee, weeping in isolation because my ambition had driven away a good man. It was a convenient story that made Chantel look like the ultimate success. The reality was that I owned 3,000 square feet of prime real estate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the Atlanta skyline. My home was sleek, minimalist, and expensive, purchased entirely with the wealth I had quietly accumulated as a senior forensic accountant. I did not need Jamal. I had never needed Jamal. I walked straight past the custom velvet sofa and the marble kitchen island. I did not pour myself a glass of wine to numb the shock. I did not call a friend to vent. I went directly into my home office, a room dominated by a massive oak desk and a multi-monitor computer setup that rivaled a bank security hub. I sat down in my leather chair, booted up my secure terminal, and went straight to the data. People lie. Family members lie. Men who marry you for your credit score lie. But numbers never do. Money always leaves a fingerprint, and I was an expert at dusting for them. Jamal thought he was playing a high-stakes game of corporate espionage, but the man was a financial infant. During our marriage, I had to physically take his credit cards away because he could not understand how compound interest worked. He could not balance a joint checking account without triggering an overdraft fee. The idea that he had successfully executed a sophisticated money laundering scheme with my sister was laughable. I logged into my encrypted firm network, bypassing the standard public portals, and accessing the deep financial databases I used for corporate fraud investigations. Jamal had practically screamed his entire predicament into the hospital lobby. He mentioned a bounced $20,000 wire transfer and a $70,000 total payout. He also mentioned a business. I started with the state business registry running a targeted query for any newly formed limited liability companies registered under Jamal's legal name within the last 18 months. It took exactly 4 minutes for the database to return a hit. The screen illuminated with the registration documents for a company called Apex Consulting. I pulled the corporate filings and studied the timeline. Apex Consulting was incorporated exactly 4 weeks before Jamal unexpectedly packed his bags and filed the divorce papers. The registered business address was not a commercial office building or even a co-working space. It was a rented mailbox at a strip mall shipping center 2 towns over. He was not even trying to hide his tracks properly. He had set up a shell company for the sole purpose of receiving a massive influx of cash without triggering personal income tax audits. But receiving a wire transfer meant there had to be a sender. I needed to find the source of the initial $50,000. Jamal had explicitly stated that he took a payout to ruin our marriage. I ran a trace on the routing numbers associated with the Apex Consulting accounts, utilizing the legitimate access granted by my firm's investigative software. The digital paper trail lit up my monitor, drawing a bright, undeniable line through the banking networks. A single massive deposit of $50,000 had cleared into Jamal's account 6 months ago. I traced the originating routing number, pushing through the basic layers of banking obfuscation that amateur criminals use to hide their activity. I expected the money to come from Chantel's personal checking account, or perhaps a secret slush fund my parents had set up to protect her. The screen refreshed, buffering for a fraction of a second before displaying the origin account details. My breath caught in my throat. I sat back in my leather chair, staring at the glowing letters on my screen. The money had not come from Chantel. It had not come from my parents. The $50,000 had been pulled directly from the Blackwood Family Trust. It was a joint wealth management account shared by Chantel and her husband Harrison. Harrison Blackwood came from generations of old money wealth. He was a highly respected architectural developer who valued integrity, reputation, and strict financial control above absolutely everything else. Chantel used Harrison as her ultimate status symbol, constantly parading his wealth to prove she was superior to me. But I knew how Harrison operated. During our painful forced family dinners, Harrison had made his financial protocols abundantly clear. He treated his family trust like an impenetrable fortress. Any withdrawal from that specific trust account over $10,000 required dual authorization. That meant it required a physical signature from both Harrison and Chantel, accompanied by a direct phone verification from his primary wealth manager. Chantel did not have the authority to unilaterally drain $50,000 to pay off my ex-husband. She simply did not have the clearance to move that kind of money without Harrison knowing exactly where every single penny was going. The realization washed over me, cold and absolute. Harrison would never approve a $50,000 payout to a fake consulting firm run by his disgraced brother-in-law. He would never fund the destruction of my marriage. There was only one way Chantel could have bypassed the old money security protocols to extract that cash. She had forged Harrison's signature on the authorization forms. She had impersonated or bypassed the phone verification. My perfect, pious golden child sister had committed federal wire fraud and identity theft against her own husband. She had stolen from the Blackwood family trust to pay Jamal to ruin my life, and then she had the audacity to stand in a hospital lobby and tell me that Jamal upgraded when he left me. She had handed him the money to leave. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding with a slow, heavy rhythm. I highlighted the forged bank statements, the routing history, and the incorporation dates of Apex Consulting, sending the entire cache of documents to my secure private server. I hit print, listening to the quiet hum of the laser printer, producing the hard copies of my sister's imminent destruction. Suddenly, my phone vibrated violently against the polished mahogany wood of my desk. The screen lit up, breaking the quiet focus of my office. It was a text message from my father. I picked up the device, my eyes scanning the words he had typed out in his usual demanding, authoritative, pastoral tone. He was not asking for my side of the story. He was issuing a command. "You will be at Sunday dinner tomorrow at 2 o'clock sharp," the text read. "You will apologize to your sister and your mother for your unhinged behavior at the hospital today. You will repent for your jealousy. Do not embarrass this family any further, or you will no longer be welcome in our lives." I looked from the threatening, manipulative text message on my phone to the undeniable federal-level proof of fraud sitting freshly printed on my desk. My father wanted me to come to his sprawling suburban estate, bow my head, and apologize to the woman who had literally purchased my heartbreak. He wanted me to sit at his dining table and pretend that I was the broken, bitter failure they so desperately needed me to be. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. I picked up the stack of printed bank statements, feeling the heavy, expensive paper between my fingers. I placed the documents carefully into a pristine black leather folder. I picked up my phone, my thumbs moving swiftly across the keyboard as I drafted my reply to the man who was supposed to protect me. I hit send. I would not miss Sunday dinner for the world. My thumb hovered over the screen for only a fraction of a second before I tapped send. I would not miss Sunday dinner for the world. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the polished mahogany of my desk. The quiet hum of my laser printer finishing its job was the only sound in my sprawling condo. I gathered the freshly printed pages. The routing histories from the bank, the forged authorization signatures, the corporate registration for the fake entity known as Apex Consulting. Each crisp page was a nail in the coffin of my sister's perfectly fabricated life. I aligned the edges precisely and slipped the documents into a sleek black leather portfolio. My family had spent years treating me like a volatile emotional liability. They expected me to show up to their estate weeping, defensive, and desperate for their validation. Instead, they were going to get the senior forensic accountant. I walked into my massive walk-in closet and bypassed the understated, cheap clothes I usually wore around them just to make them feel comfortable. I pulled out a tailored emerald green designer dress that fit me like absolute armor. I slipped on a pair of stiletto heels that echoed sharply against my hardwood floors. I was not going to a family dinner. I was walking into a boardroom to execute a hostile takeover. The drive to the affluent suburbs took exactly 45 minutes. I bypassed the modest neighborhoods of my childhood and turned onto the sprawling, tree-lined avenues where my parents had purchased their estate. The house was a massive brick colonial with towering white columns sitting on 2 acres of meticulously landscaped grass. It was a physical monument to my father's pastoral success and my mother's absolute obsession with social climbing. I pulled my luxury sedan into the circular driveway, parking deliberately next to Harrison's pristine black Range Rover. As I killed the engine, I took one slow, deep breath. I grabbed the black leather portfolio from the passenger seat and stepped out into the warm Sunday afternoon air. Before I even reached the front steps, the heavy oak door swung open. The sound of gospel music playing at an aggressively cheerful volume drifted out onto the porch. It was the soundtrack of my mother's toxic positivity, specifically designed to drown out any authentic conversation or genuine emotion. Yvonne stood in the doorway, wearing a floral silk dress and a welcoming smile that did not even come close to reaching her cold eyes. Look who decided to show her face, my mother said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She stepped back, refusing to offer me a hug, simply gesturing for me to enter my own childhood home, as if I were a stranger delivering a package. Your father is already at the table. Do not cause any disruptions today, Zuri. We are celebrating the Lord's Day. I did not respond. I walked past her, my heels clicking purposefully against the marble tiles of the foyer. The dining room was set with the expensive crystal china my mother reserved solely for impressing Harrison. The scent of roasted meat and heavy gravy filled the air. My father, Pastor DeAndre, sat at the head of the long mahogany table reading a church bulletin. He did not look up when I entered. Chantel was seated to his right, wearing a pristine white sundress, looking like the picture of absolute innocence. But her hands were gripping her water glass so tightly her knuckles were completely white. Then there was Harrison. Harrison Blackwood came from generations of strict old money wealth. He was tall, impeccably groomed, and possessed a quiet, commanding presence that made my father's pastoral authority look like a cheap parlor trick. Harrison valued integrity, reputation, and honesty above absolutely everything else. He was the reason Chantel could afford her designer bags, and he was the reason she was currently terrified. Zuri, Harrison said, standing up immediately as I walked into the room. A warm, genuine smile broke across his face. He walked over and gave me a firm, respectful hug. It is so incredibly good to see you. How are things at the firm? I read about that massive corporate fraud case your team just cracked. Brilliant work. Truly brilliant. Thank you, Harrison, I replied, offering him a warm smile in return. It has been a busy quarter, but the work is highly rewarding. Tracking hidden assets is always a fascinating puzzle. I saw Chantel flinch out of the corner of my eye. Her posture stiffened, and she immediately reached out, grabbing Harrison's forearm to pull him back toward his designated chair. Harrison, darling, the food is getting cold. Chantel interrupted, her voice breathless and frantic. Sit down. Let us just enjoy the meal. We do not need to talk about depressing legal cases at the dinner table. Harrison patted her hand gently, completely oblivious to the sheer panic radiating from his wife. Of course, my love, he said, taking his seat. I took the only remaining chair at the opposite end of the table, placing my black leather portfolio carefully on the empty seat beside me. My father finally lowered his bulletin, folding his hands together on the table. Let us pray, he announced. We bowed our heads. Lord, we thank you for this bountiful meal. We ask that you heal troubled minds, soften bitter hearts, and grant peace to those in this family who have strayed from the path of righteousness and grace. It was a blatant, weaponized prayer directed entirely at me, a tactic he had used since I was a teenager. He said amen, and the room murmured in agreement. The clinking of silverware began immediately. Chantel did not waste a single second. She knew she had to control the narrative before I had a chance to speak. She sighed heavily, putting on a flawless theatrical mask of deep, agonizing sisterly concern. Harrison, darling. I was telling Mom and Dad earlier about how incredibly worried I am about Zuri. Chantel began, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Yesterday at the hospital, we had a very disturbing encounter. Zuri had a complete manic episode in the lobby. She was screaming and making up the most delusional, wild conspiracy theories. Harrison frowned, looking at me with genuine concern. A manic episode. Zuri, are you all right? What happened? It is her divorce. Harrison, Chantel interjected quickly, leaning closer to her husband. She is still so broken over Jamal leaving her. She saw him at the hospital yesterday and she just snapped. She started cornering him, harassing him, yelling about money and secret plots. It was deeply embarrassing, but mostly it just broke my heart to see my sister in such a dark, twisted mental state. My mother, Yvonne, nodded vigorously, passing a bowl of green beans to my father. It is true, Harrison. We had to physically intervene to stop her from making a scene in front of the entire hospital staff. Zuri has always struggled with her emotions, but this was entirely different. She is completely unhinged. I sat back in my chair, resting my hands in my lap, watching them weave their beautiful tapestry of absolute lies. I did not interrupt. I let them dig the hole as deep as possible. That is why I wanted to bring it up today, Chantel continued, looking at me with wide, innocent eyes. Zuri, I love you. We all love you. And I really think you need serious professional help. You need a good therapist to help you process your failure to keep your husband. And please do not worry about the cost. Harrison and I have discussed it, and we are more than happy to pay for your treatment. We will cover the bills completely out of our own pockets. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was using Harrison's wealth as a weapon to assert her dominance, framing her financial fraud as a future act of charity. She thought she had completely outmaneuvered me. My mother beamed with pride, practically glowing as she picked up the serving platter of sliced roast beef. You have always had such a beautiful, charitable heart, Chantel Yvonne praised loudly. Always looking out for your sister even when she is bitter and ungrateful. The Lord will reward your generosity. Yvonne began plating the food. She placed a thick, juicy, perfectly cooked slab of prime rib onto Harrison's plate. She served my father the same. She placed a beautiful, tender portion onto Chantel's plate. Then, without breaking eye contact with me, my mother took the serving fork and scraped the very bottom of the platter. She picked up the dry, overcooked, burned-end pieces of the roast, the scraps that nobody else wanted, and dropped them unceremoniously onto my porcelain plate. She pushed the plate across the table toward me. "Eat up, Zuri," my mother commanded with a tight, challenging smile. "Maybe a good home-cooked meal will calm your manic nerves." I looked down at the plate of burned scraps. It was the perfect physical manifestation of my entire existence in this family. I was always the afterthought. I was always expected to consume the leftovers, swallow my pride, and be grateful for whatever absolute garbage they decided to hand me. For 27 years, I would have eaten the dry meat just to keep the peace. I would have accepted the insult to avoid a screaming match. But I was no longer the frightened girl desperately seeking their approval. I reached out and placed my index finger on the rim of the plate. With one smooth, deliberate motion, I pushed the plate of scraps away from me. The porcelain scraped loudly against the mahogany table, coming to a dead stop in the exact center of the dining arrangement. The sound made everyone at the table freeze. "I am afraid I have completely lost my appetite for scraps, Mom," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and dangerously calm. I turned my head and smiled directly at Chantel. The smug, victorious look on her face began to fracture instantly, replaced by a sudden creeping terror as she realized I was not reacting the way she had calculated. I did not yell. I did not cry. I picked up my crystal water glass, took a slow, elegant sip, and then turned my attention entirely away from my blood relatives. I looked directly at the man who actually controlled the power in the room. "I appreciate the incredibly generous offer for therapy, Chantel," I stated, my eyes locked on her husband. But my mind has never been clearer than it is right at this very moment. I reached down and picked up the sleek black leather portfolio from the empty chair beside me. I placed it gently onto the table right next to the rejected plate of burned meat. The soft thud of the heavy leather hitting the wood sounded like a gavel dropping in a silent courtroom. "Harrison," I said, maintaining a perfectly polite forensic calm, "I have been meaning to ask you about your recent angel investments." The heavy, suffocating silence that fell over the dining room was absolute. The upbeat, joyful gospel music piping through the hidden ceiling. Speakers suddenly felt entirely absurd. A cheerful soundtrack to an impending execution. I kept my hands resting lightly on the pristine mahogany table, my posture radiating the clinical, detached confidence of a senior auditor sitting across from a terrified embezzler. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at my sister. My gaze remained locked entirely on Harrison. Harrison Blackwood was a man whose entire existence was defined by control, precision, and the quiet superiority of inherited wealth. He set his silver fork down on the edge of his china plate, wiping his mouth deliberately with a linen napkin. A look of polite, mild curiosity settled over his aristocratic features. He loved discussing business. He loved mentoring people. Chantel had spent the last 3 years carefully curating my image as the financially clueless, struggling sister who desperately needed guidance, and Harrison was always eager to play the role of the benevolent patriarch. "Angel investments." Harrison repeated, his deep voice calm and measured. He leaned back in his heavy dining chair, crossing his arms over his chest. I am always looking for promising capital ventures, Zuri. You know my firm actively diversifies our portfolio every quarter, but I must admit I am surprised you are asking. Chantel mentioned you were taking a step back from financial matters to focus on your emotional recovery. I offered him a tight, razor-thin smile. Chantel has a remarkable imagination when it comes to my life, but my focus has never been sharper. I am specifically asking about the $50,000 capital injection you recently authorized, the seed money for a local startup called Apex Consulting. The name of the fake corporate shell dropped into the middle of the dining room like a live grenade. Harrison blinked. The polite mentoring smile vanished from his face, replaced by a rigid mask of intense analytical calculation. I could practically see his mind rapidly scanning through his meticulous mental ledger. This was a man who reviewed comprehensive asset reports every single Friday morning. He knew the names of the board members of every corporation he funded. He knew the exact yield of his municipal bonds. He certainly knew whether or not he had dropped $50,000 in liquid cash into a random consulting firm. Apex Consulting. Harrison said slowly, testing the syllables on his tongue, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Zuri, I believe you are mistaken. I have not funded any local startups this quarter, and I certainly have not invested in any consulting firms this year, let alone one operating under that name. My primary focus has been exclusively on commercial real estate acquisitions in the metropolitan area. I leaned forward just a fraction of an inch, ensuring my voice carried the absolute weight of undeniable fact. Are you completely certain about that, Harrison? Because $50,000 is a highly specific amount of liquid capital to misplace from your primary joint wealth management account, specifically the Blackwood Family Trust. The sound that escaped Chantel's throat was something between a strangled gasp and a dying animal. She could not let Harrison process my last sentence. Her brain had completely short-circuited, overwhelmed by the sheer, unadulterated terror of her financial fraud being exposed in front of the one man who could destroy her entire lifestyle. She had to stop the flow of information. She had to derail the conversation instantly. Chantel's hand shot out across the table in a violent spasming motion. She practically swatted her full crystal wine glass. The heavy glass tipped and shattered spectacularly against the polished mahogany. A brilliant dark wave of expensive red wine exploded across the pristine white damask tablecloth. It sprayed across the serving platters and splattered against the delicate floral centerpieces, looking exactly like fresh blood staining a crime scene. The sudden violent crash completely shattered the tension in the room, replacing the cold clinical exposure of fraud with manufactured domestic chaos. "Oh my goodness!" Chantel shrieked. Her voice was an exaggerated, high-pitched wail of pure theatrical panic. "Look what I just did! I am so clumsy today. My hand just slipped. Harrison, please help me. Get some towels quickly before it ruins the wood. The wine is getting everywhere." Harrison was momentarily startled by the sudden eruption of broken glass and spilling wine. He pushed his chair back instinctively to avoid the red liquid dripping off the edge of the table, his attention temporarily dragged away from the name Apex Consulting. But I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle to help her clean up the mess. I sat perfectly still, watching my sister frantically dab at the ruined tablecloth with a flimsy cloth napkin, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the fabric. She was hyperventilating, her eyes wide with sheer panic, desperately hoping that a spilled drink would somehow magically erase the federal-level financial crimes I was actively bringing to light. My mother, First Lady, Yvonne, saw that the distraction was failing. She saw me sitting there completely untouched by Chantel's hysterical performance. Yvonne realized instantly that her golden child was trapped, and she abandoned the facade of the loving, hospitable matriarch without a second thought. She went straight for the jugular. Yvonne slammed her hands down onto the table, ignoring the spreading puddle of red wine. She pointed a trembling accusatory finger directly at my face, her voice rising into a deafening, hysterical scream. "You bitter, jealous liar!" my mother roared, her face contorting with a terrifying, raw hatred. "How dare you come into my home on a Sunday and invent these disgusting financial fantasies? You cannot stand the fact that Chantel is blessed. You cannot stand that she has a beautiful, successful marriage while you are sitting here completely alone. Jamal left you because you are a miserable, paranoid woman who drives everyone away. And now you are trying to infect your sister's perfect life with your psychotic sickness just to drag her down to your pathetic level. Her words were designed to be a fatal emotional blow. For 27 years, my mother had used my insecurities as ammunition, breaking me down to ensure I always felt inferior to Chantel. She expected me to burst into tears. She expected me to defend my failed marriage and beg for her understanding. She wanted Harrison to see me as a completely unhinged, hysterical woman, driven mad by divorce and jealousy, rendering every word I said completely invalid. But her screaming had absolutely no effect on me. I looked at her flushed, furious face and felt nothing but a cold, clinical pity. She was a woman defending a thief to protect an illusion. My father, Pastor DeAndre, realized the verbal assault was not breaking my composure. He saw Harrison staring at my mother in utter shock, completely bewildered by the sudden, vicious explosion of maternal rage. My father knew he had to physically remove me from the room before I could speak another word. He had to protect his son-in-law's comfort and his own flawless community reputation. DeAndre stood up abruptly, his heavy chair scraping violently against the floorboards. He marched around the long dining table with heavy, intimidating strides. He did not ask me to leave. He did not use his soothing, pastoral voice. He reached out and closed his massive, heavy hand around my upper arm. His fingers dug painfully into my skin through the fabric of my emerald green dress. His grip was hard, aggressive, and entirely meant to dominate and terrify me into submission. "You have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed today," Zuri, my father, hissed. His voice vibrated with a dark, suppressed rage, his face inches from mine. "You are leaving my dining room right now, and you are leaving this property. I will not allow you to disrespect Harrison and Chantel with these psychotic fabrications under my roof. You are an absolute disgrace to this family." He yanked my arm, attempting to forcefully drag me out of my chair and physically escort me out the front door like a trespassing criminal. I did not scream. I did not attempt to wrestle him. I did not engage in the undignified physical struggle he was trying to provoke. I simply turned my cold, dead gaze to my father. I planted my feet firmly on the hardwood floor, dropped my center of gravity, and yanked my arm violently downward with a sharp, forceful twist. The sudden, focused leverage broke his grip completely. My father stumbled back half a step, his eyes widening in absolute shock at my physical defiance. He was a man who demanded total obedience, a man who commanded thousands of people every Sunday, and his own daughter had just swatted him away like an irrelevant nuisance. I ignored my father entirely. I picked up my black leather portfolio from the table, but I deliberately left one single cleanly folded sheet of heavy stock paper resting beside my water glass. It was a high-resolution copy of the bank authorization form, complete with the forged signature and the routed wire transfer details. I picked up the folded paper, stepped gracefully around the spreading puddle of red wine and the shattered crystal, and stopped directly in front of Harrison. Harrison had stood up. He was holding a stained linen napkin, looking between his furious father-in-law, his weeping, hyperventilating wife, and me. The confusion in his eyes was slowly hardening into a dark, terrifying suspicion. He was a brilliant man. The pieces were already locking together in his mind. I reached out smoothly. I slid the folded bank document cleanly into the breast pocket of Harrison's tailored suit jacket, letting my hand linger for just a second to smooth the lapel perfectly flat. I offered him a sad, knowing smile. "I do not need to invent fantasies, Harrison," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy, toxic air of the dining room with absolute, unshakable clarity. "Ask your wife why your signature is on that wire transfer." The drive away from my parents' sprawling suburban estate was the most peaceful 20 minutes I had experienced in a year. I walked out the heavy oak front doors and did not look back. Behind me, the muffled sounds of gospel music were entirely eclipsed by the sudden explosive shouting echoing from the formal dining room. Harrison's deep, authoritative voice boomed through the hallways, demanding immediate answers. Chantel's frantic, high-pitched sobbing followed instantly. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, press the push to start button, and let the quiet, powerful hum of the engine ground me. I shifted into gear and drove down the manicured driveway, leaving the toxic wreckage of my family exactly where it belonged. I had executed the exposure perfectly. No screaming, no tears, no emotional breakdowns, just pure, unadulterated facts delivered to the one man who could dismantle Chantel's entire existence. I had barely merged onto the interstate heading back toward the city skyline when my phone began to vibrate violently against the center console. The caller ID flashed brightly on the digital dashboard screen. Tiara, my former best friend. The woman who had stood beside me at my wedding, smiling in her bridesmaid dress, only to eagerly crawl into my marital bed the moment my sister waved a check in her face. I tapped the steering wheel control to answer, letting the audio route through the car's premium speakers. I did not say hello. I just listened to her breathe. "Zuri, what did you do?" Tiara shrieked. Her voice was pitched so high it practically distorted the car speakers. She sounded absolutely frantic, completely stripped of the smug, victorious superiority she usually paraded around town whenever she saw mutual acquaintances. Jamal's accounts are locked. His business account, his personal checking, the joint savings account he just opened for us last week. Everything is frozen solid. He is at the bank right now, screaming at a branch manager, and they are telling him his assets are under federal review. What did you do to him? I kept my eyes steadily on the road, my grip loose and relaxed on the steering wheel. I felt my pulse slow down, a cool wave of satisfaction washing over me. I did exactly what I do best. Tiara, I said, my voice smooth, even, and entirely unbothered. I audited him. I am taking the next exit. I am on my way to your apartment right now. Do not leave. I disconnected the call before she could scream another word. I steered my car toward the upscale, heavily gated apartment complex in Midtown, where Tiara lived. I knew the building well. It was a luxury high-rise that required extensive background checks and proof of income equivalent to 3 times the exorbitant monthly rent. Jamal had clearly used the initial $50,000 from Chantel to secure the lease, paying months up front to play the role of the wealthy new provider. I parked in the designated visitor lot, took the private elevator up to the 14th floor, and walked down the plush carpeted hallway. I knocked twice on her heavy wooden door. It swung open almost immediately. Tiara stood in the doorway, balancing a fussing infant on her left hip. She was wearing expensive silk loungewear and a delicate gold necklace I immediately recognized as one Jamal had purchased recently. She was clearly trying to project the image of a pampered, perfectly content new mother living a life of leisure. But the dark, heavy circles under her eyes and the frantic, nervous twitch of her hands betrayed her completely. She looked at me, took a deep, shaky breath, and instantly tried to pivot back to her rehearsed narrative. She pushed her shoulders back, adopting a deeply condescending, pitiful look that she had undoubtedly practiced in the mirror. "I do not know why you came all the way over here, Zuri." Tiara sighed, shifting the baby higher on her hip and looking at me with feigned exhaustion. "Look, I know you are hurt. I know it is incredibly hard for you to see us building a family together. But Jamal and I just fell in love. We did not plan to hurt you, and we certainly did not want to break your heart. It just happened naturally. You have to accept reality and move on with your life instead of being bitter and trying to sabotage his business accounts out of pure jealousy." He upgraded, Zuri. "We have a beautiful child now. You need to stop harassing us and let it go." I did not yell. I did not slap her across her smug face. I did not even raise the volume of my voice. I simply stepped past the threshold, forcing her to back up into the apartment, and slowly, deliberately closed the heavy door behind me. I looked at the baby cooing softly against her shoulder, and then looked directly into Tiara's wide, nervous eyes. "You really are incredibly committed to the script, Tiara," I said, crossing my arms over my chest and taking in the expensive modern furniture filling the living room. "But the play has been permanently canceled. I strongly suggest you drop the tragic romance act right now, because your leading man is about to face a federal indictment." Tiara scoffed, rolling her eyes in a defensive display of bravado, but her grip on the baby tightened noticeably. You are being ridiculous and dramatic. Jamal is a legitimate corporate consultant now. He has private clients. He has major funding. He does not need you anymore. Jamal has absolutely nothing. I stated my words, cutting through her delusion with surgical precision. Jamal has exactly $0 to his legal name. That luxury car he drives is leased. This beautiful apartment is rented. The expensive silk you are wearing is bought with stolen funds. The initial $50,000 he used to fund this entire charade did not come from a legitimate client. It came from a joint wealth management trust account belonging to Harrison Blackwood. Tiara's face went completely blank. Her mouth opened slightly, but she could not seem to form any coherent words. She stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. My sister Chantel forged her husband's signature to steal $50,000 to pay Jamal to leave me. I continued pacing slowly across her expensive rug, my heels sinking into the plush fabric. She promised him another $20,000 to finish the job. But Chantel's final check bounced yesterday morning because the bank finally flagged the unauthorized withdrawal. Jamal completely panicked and confronted her at the hospital. He confessed to the entire scheme while I stood 5 feet away holding a recording device. He sang like a bird, Tiara. He told me everything. That is a lie, Tiara stammered, stumbling backward until her back hit the hallway wall. Jamal would not do that. He loves me. He chose me. Jamal loves money. He does not have to work for, I corrected her sharply, refusing to let her hide behind fake romance. And unfortunately for both of you, setting up a fake limited liability company to receive stolen funds from a corporate trust account is the literal textbook definition of money laundering. As a senior forensic accountant, I am legally obligated to report suspicious financial activity when I uncover it. So I flagged his fake LLC. I routed the forged documents to the fraud department of Harrison's bank. The accounts are not frozen because of a banking glitch, Tiara. They are frozen because the federal authorities are currently freezing assets tied to financial crimes. I watched the color completely drain from Tiara's face. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her, shattering her delusion into a million pieces. The luxury apartment, the silk pajamas, the wealthy new provider. It was all a fragile house of cards built entirely on stolen money, and I had just set the whole thing on fire. You do not understand, Tiara whispered, her voice shaking violently. We have a lease. We have massive car payments. We have a baby to feed. If Jamal loses his money, if he goes to prison, I have absolutely nothing left. I quit my job when he got the consulting money. I cannot raise this child alone. I looked at her, feeling absolutely no pity for the woman who had helped destroy my life for a paycheck. You should have thought about your long-term financial security before you accepted $10,000 from my sister to pretend you were sleeping with my husband, I said, watching her eyes widen in sheer panic as she realized I knew every single sordid detail of their transaction. You wanted to play the role of the homewrecker to humiliate me publicly. You wanted to help Chantel break me. Now you get to play the role of the destitute single mother standing by her convicted felon boyfriend. I truly hope the $10,000 was worth it. Tiara looked down at the baby in her arms. Her chest began to heave rapidly as a full-blown panic attack took hold. Her breathing turned into ragged gasps. She looked back up at me, tears spilling over her eyelashes, her carefully constructed world entirely obliterated. Jamal is going to jail, she gasped, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, terrified squeak. She clutched the baby closer to her chest, her eyes wide with absolute unfiltered terror. But he cannot go to jail, Zuri. He cannot. He is not even the father. The drive away from my parents' sprawling suburban estate was the most peaceful 20 minutes I had experienced in an entire year. I walked out their heavy oak front doors and did not look back. Behind me, the muffled sounds of gospel music were entirely eclipsed by the sudden explosive shouting echoing from the formal dining room. Harrison's deep, authoritative voice boomed through the hallways, demanding immediate answers. Chantel's frantic, high-pitched sobbing followed instantly. I slid into the driver's seat of my luxury sedan, pressed the push-to-start button, and let the quiet, powerful hum of the engine ground me. I shifted into gear and drove down the manicured driveway, leaving the toxic wreckage of my family exactly where it belonged. I had executed the exposure perfectly. No screaming, no tears, no emotional breakdowns, just pure, unadulterated facts delivered to the one man who could dismantle Chantel's entire existence. I had barely merged onto the interstate heading back toward the city skyline when my phone began to vibrate violently against the center console. The caller ID flashed brightly on the digital dashboard screen. Tiara, my former best friend. The woman who had stood beside me at my wedding, smiling in her bridesmaid dress, only to eagerly crawl into my marital bed the moment my sister waved a check in her face. I tapped the steering wheel control to answer, letting the audio route through the car's premium speakers. I did not say hello. I just listened to her breathe. "Zuri, what did you do?" Tiara shrieked. Her voice was pitched so high it practically distorted the car speakers. She sounded absolutely frantic, completely stripped of the smug, victorious superiority she usually paraded around town whenever she saw mutual acquaintances. "Jamal's accounts are locked. His business account, his personal checking, the joint savings account he just opened for us last week. Everything is frozen solid. He is at the bank right now screaming at a branch manager, and they are telling him his assets are under federal review. What did you do to him?" I kept my eyes steadily on the road, my grip loose and relaxed on the steering wheel. I felt my pulse slow down, a cool wave of satisfaction washing over me. I did exactly what I do best. "Tiara," I said, my voice smooth, even, and entirely unbothered. "I audited him. I am taking the next exit. I am on my way to your apartment right now. Do not leave." I disconnected the call before she could scream another word. I steered my car toward the upscale, heavily gated apartment complex in Midtown where Tiara lived. I knew the building well. It was a luxury high-rise that required extensive background checks and proof of income equivalent to 3 times the exorbitant monthly rent. Jamal had clearly used the initial $50,000 from Chantel to secure the lease, paying months up front, to play the role of the wealthy new provider. I parked in the designated visitor lot, took the private elevator up to the 14th floor and walked down the plush carpeted hallway. I knocked twice on her heavy wooden door. It swung open almost immediately. Tiara stood in the doorway, balancing a fussing infant on her left hip. She was wearing expensive silk loungewear and a delicate gold necklace I immediately recognized as one Jamal had purchased recently. She was clearly trying to project the image of a pampered, perfectly content new mother living a life of leisure. But the dark, heavy circles under her eyes and the frantic, nervous twitch of her hands betrayed her completely. She looked at me, took a deep, shaky breath, and instantly tried to pivot back to her rehearsed narrative. She pushed her shoulders back, adopting a deeply condescending, pitiful look that she had undoubtedly practiced in the mirror. "I do not know why you came all the way over here." "Zuri?" Tiara sighed, shifting the baby higher on her hip and looking at me with feigned exhaustion. "Look, I know you are hurt. I know it is incredibly hard for you to see us building a family together. But Jamal and I just fell in love. We did not plan to hurt you, and we certainly did not want to break your heart. It just happened naturally. You have to accept reality and move on with your life, instead of being bitter and trying to sabotage his business accounts out of pure jealousy." He upgraded. "Zuri, we have a beautiful child now. You need to stop harassing us and let it go." I did not yell. I did not slap her across her smug face. I did not even raise the volume of my voice. I simply stepped past the threshold, forcing her to back up into the apartment and slowly, deliberately close the heavy door behind me. I looked at the baby cooing softly against her shoulder and then looked directly into Tiara's wide, nervous eyes. "You really are incredibly committed to the script, Tiara," I said, crossing my arms over my chest and taking in the expensive modern furniture filling the living room. "But the play has been permanently canceled. I strongly suggest you drop the tragic romance act right now, because your leading man is about to face a federal indictment." Tiara scoffed, rolling her eyes in a defensive display of bravado, but her grip on the baby tightened noticeably. "You are being ridiculous and dramatic. Jamal is a legitimate corporate consultant now. He has private clients. He has major funding. He does not need you anymore. Jamal has absolutely nothing. I stated my words, cutting through her delusion with surgical precision. Jamal has exactly $0 to his legal name. That luxury car he drives is leased. This beautiful apartment is rented. The expensive silk you are wearing is bought with stolen funds. The initial $50,000 he used to fund this entire charade did not come from a legitimate client. It came from a joint wealth management trust account belonging to Harrison Blackwood. Tiara's face went completely blank. Her mouth opened slightly, but she could not seem to form any coherent words. She stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. My sister Chantel forged her husband's signature to steal $50,000 to pay Jamal to leave me. I continued pacing slowly across her expensive rug, my heels sinking into the plush fabric. She promised him another $20,000 to finish the job, but Chantel's final check bounced yesterday morning because the bank finally flagged the unauthorized withdrawal. Jamal completely panicked and confronted her at the hospital. He confessed to the entire scheme while I stood 5 feet away holding a recording device. He sang like a bird, Tiara. He told me everything. That is a lie, Tiara stammered, stumbling backward until her back hit the hallway wall. Jamal would not do that. He loves me. He chose me. Jamal loves money he does not have to work for, I corrected her sharply, refusing to let her hide behind fake romance. And unfortunately for both of you, setting up a fake limited liability company to receive stolen funds from a corporate trust account is the literal textbook definition of money laundering. As a senior forensic accountant, I am legally obligated to report suspicious financial activity when I uncover it. So I flagged his fake LLC. I routed the forged documents to the fraud department of Harrison's bank. The accounts are not frozen because of a banking glitch, Tiara. They are frozen because the federal authorities are currently freezing assets tied to financial crimes. I watched the color completely drain from Tiara's face. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her, shattering her delusion into a million pieces. The luxury apartment, the silk pajamas, the wealthy new provider. It was all a fragile house of cards built entirely on stolen money, and I had just set the whole thing on fire. You do not understand, Tiara whispered, her voice shaking violently. We have a lease, we have massive car payments, we have a baby to feed. If Jamal loses his money, if he goes to prison, I have absolutely nothing left. I quit my job when he got the consulting money. I cannot raise this child alone. I looked at her, feeling absolutely no pity for the woman who had helped destroy my life for a paycheck. You should have thought about your long-term financial security before you accepted $10,000 from my sister to pretend you were sleeping with my husband, I said, watching her eyes widen in sheer panic as she realized I knew every single sordid detail of their transaction. You wanted to play the role of the homewrecker to humiliate me publicly. You wanted to help Chantel break me. Now you get to play the role of the destitute single mother standing by her convicted felon boyfriend. I truly hope the $10,000 was worth it. Tiara looked down at the baby in her arms. Her chest began to heave rapidly as a full-blown panic attack took hold. Her breathing turned into ragged gasps. She looked back up at me, tears spilling over her eyelashes, her carefully constructed world entirely obliterated. Jamal is going to jail, she gasped, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, terrified squeak. She clutched the baby closer to her chest, her eyes wide with absolute, unfiltered terror. But he cannot go to jail, Zuri. He cannot. He is not even the father. The words hung in the suffocating silence of the luxury apartment. Jamal is not even the father. The baby resting against Tiara's shoulder let out a soft, oblivious coo, completely unaware of the absolute devastation its paternity had just unleashed. I stood perfectly still, my mind immediately categorizing this new variable. A fake baby, a fabricated family, a completely manufactured motive for divorce. I looked at the infant, then back up at Tiara. Her eyes were darting around the room as if searching for an emergency exit that did not exist. The silk loungewear she wore suddenly looked incredibly cheap, clinging to a woman who had just realized she was an accessory to federal fraud. Explain that to me, Tiara, I commanded. My voice lacked any trace of the emotional hysteria she was clearly expecting. I did not shed a tear over my ex-husband claiming another man's child. I simply needed the data. Start from the very beginning and do not leave out a single detail. Whose child are you holding? Tiara swallowed hard. She practically collapsed into a velvet armchair, pulling the baby tightly against her chest. She was trembling so violently that the heavy gold chain around her neck rattled. "He is married," Tiara whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the central air conditioning. "The father. He is a married man. He serves on the deacon board at your father's church. We had an arrangement, a private arrangement. When I found out I was pregnant, he panicked. He told me he would cut me off completely if I ruined his reputation in the congregation. He threatened to have me blacklisted from every social circle in Atlanta. I had no money, Zuri. I had no way to afford this lifestyle, and the father was ready to leave me completely destitute to protect his own image." The sheer level of hypocrisy vibrating through the walls of my father's church was staggering, but I pushed that aside. The church gossip was irrelevant compared to the financial mechanics of Chantel's plot. "So, you needed a provider," I stated, pacing slowly across the living room floor. "And Chantel needed a weapon. How exactly did my sister bridge the gap between your illegitimate pregnancy and my marriage?" Tiara squeezed her eyes shut, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. She was crumbling under the weight of her own deception. Chantel knew about the baby. She always knows everyone's business at that church. She came to my apartment one night right after my first trimester. She knew I was terrified of being a broke single mother. She also knew that Jamal was drowning in secret credit card debt because he complained about your financial strictness to anyone who would listen. Chantel sat right across from me and laid out the entire blueprint. She said she was willing to pay both of us to solve our problems, but it had to be a package deal. I stopped pacing and stared at her. A package deal. "Chantel did not just want Jamal to divorce you," Tiara sobbed, rocking the baby nervously. "She wanted to humiliate you. She hated the way you walked into that church every Sunday looking so independent and successful. She hated that your career was taking off. She told me that simply having Jamal leave you was not enough. People would just think you outgrew him. She needed the congregation to pity you. She needed your parents to view you as a fundamental failure as a woman." The puzzle pieces locked together with a sickening, audible snap in my mind. Chantel knew exactly what she was doing. By having Jamal leave me for my best friend, she orchestrated the ultimate personal betrayal. But by having him claim a child, she weaponized the one thing I had not yet achieved. She knew our mother constantly pressured me about starting a family. She knew the church gossiped about my focus on corporate audits over motherhood. Chantel told Jamal to play the noble, misunderstood husband. Tiara continued wiping her face with the back of her hand. She told him to tell everyone that he just desperately wanted to be a father, and that you were too cold, too career-obsessed, and too barren to give him a family. Jamal loved the idea. It gave him the perfect sympathetic exit. He got to walk away looking like a tragic hero who just wanted a child to love, and you were left looking like the bitter, broken woman who drove him away. Jamal claimed my baby to legitimize his exit, and Chantel paid us both for the performance. The sheer scale of the manipulation was breathtaking. They had effectively completely assassinated my character. Every sympathetic glance I had received from church members over the past year, every condescending comment my mother had made about my empty home, every smug smile Chantel had flashed at family dinners. It was all built on a $70,000 lie. Jamal had traded his dignity to play a fake father, and Tiara had sold her best friend to secure a lease on a luxury apartment. "I do not negotiate with accomplices, Tiara," I said, turning my back on her and walking slowly toward the front door. "You made your bed with stolen money. Now you get to sleep in it. When the auditors come knocking, and they absolutely will, I suggest you tell them the exact same story you just told me. Maybe they will show you mercy. I certainly will not." I reached out and grabbed the polished brass handle of the front door. "Wait! Zuri, wait! Please!" Tiara screamed, rushing forward and grabbing the sleeve of my blouse. Her grip was tight and frantic. "I can give you more. I can give you the missing piece." I stopped looking down at her hand on my arm until she slowly, nervously released her grip. I did not speak. I simply waited. Tiara fumbled with her silk pocket, pulling out her expensive smartphone. Her fingers were shaking so violently she dropped it once onto the hardwood floor before snatching it back up. She unlocked the screen, her eyes darting between me and the glowing display. She was terrified of Chantel, but she was far more terrified of a federal indictment. She had to offer me something valuable enough to buy her way out of the crosshairs. "You think Chantel just wanted to ruin your marriage?" Tiara asked, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial, urgent whisper. "You think she just forged Harrison's signature for the first 50,000, and that was the end of the master plan?" She swiped rapidly across her phone screen, opening a hidden encrypted messaging application. She tapped on a specific group chat, bypassing layers of security that Jamal was clearly too stupid to realize she had access to. "Chantel did not just steal from her husband," Tiara said, holding the unlocked phone out toward me. Her hand was trembling, offering up the digital execution of my entire family structure. She needed that final $20,000 to keep Jamal quiet because he was threatening to blow the lid off the whole operation. But Harrison tightened his security protocols after the first withdrawal. Chantel could not hit the trust account again without triggering an immediate audit. She was desperate. She needed liquid cash instantly. I looked down at the glowing screen. "Look at the group chat," Zuri, Tiara whispered, her voice laced with absolute terror. "Look at where your sister got the rest of the money. Look at who else helped her pay for your destruction." The screen of Tiara's smartphone cast a harsh blue light in the dimly lit luxury living room. I took the device from her trembling hand, my eyes instantly scanning the interface of the encrypted messaging application. It was a high-grade privacy platform, the kind usually reserved for paranoid corporate executives or high-level drug traffickers. Jamal was too lazy to set something like this up. This was all Chantel. I scrolled to the top of the active thread, bypassing the frantic, panicked messages from earlier today, and dug directly into the archives from 6 months ago. The digital paper trail was a masterpiece of desperate, unhinged criminality. Chantel had not just been coordinating the destruction of my marriage. She had been orchestrating a massive, multi-tiered financial cover-up. As I read the rapid-fire text exchanges between my sister, my ex-husband, and my former best friend, the true architecture of the fraud began to take shape. Chantel was completely frantic in the early messages. She was begging Jamal to expedite the creation of Apex Consulting. She did not just need him to have a landing pad for the $50,000 she stole from Harrison. She needed a legitimate-looking corporate entity to process a series of much larger, far more dangerous wire transfers. "I need the routing numbers today, Jamal." One of Chantel's texts read, time-stamped at 2 in the morning. "The auditors are coming in 3 weeks. If I cannot show the capital moving into a verified vendor account, the board will vote for a full forensic review. Set up the LLC, or the entire deal is completely dead." I frowned, my professional instincts overriding the personal betrayal. Harrison's family trust did not have a board of directors that conducted scheduled audits. He managed his wealth privately. The board Chantel was referring to had to belong to a completely different organization. I continued scrolling, my thumb flicking across the glass screen, digging deeper into the digital vault. Jamal had pushed back, demanding more money for taking on the legal risk of opening the shell company. To pacify him, to prove she had the liquidity to meet his extortion demands, Chantel had made a fatal, arrogant mistake. She had taken a photograph of a digital bank ledger from her secondary monitor and sent it to the group chat. I tapped the image, expanding it to fill the screen. The header of the banking portal was unmistakable. It bore the gold and navy blue crest of Grace Fellowship Church. Below the crest, the account designation was listed in bold black text: the New Sanctuary Building and Expansion Fund. My breath caught in my throat. My father had spent the last 4 years relentlessly fundraising for a massive multi-million-dollar community center and youth sanctuary. He had heavily pressured the working-class members of his congregation to tithe above their means, promising them a physical monument to their faith. And he had put his perfect, pious golden child daughter in charge of managing the construction escrows. The ledger on the screen showed a catastrophic crater-sized deficit, Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been systematically siphoned out of the Holy Sanctuary Fund in a series of highly obfuscated rapid transfers over an 18-month period. I pulled up a series of voice notes attached to the ledger photo. I pressed play, holding the phone speaker close to my ear. "You do not understand the pressure I am under," Chantel's voice hissed through the speaker, distorted by tears and panic. "I owe 300,000 to the bookmakers in Macau. They are threatening to contact Harrison. They are threatening to come to the church. If my husband finds out I have a gambling addiction, he will divorce me and leave me with absolutely nothing." I had to pull the cash from the building fund to keep them quiet, but the church finance committee is getting suspicious about the construction delays. I need your consulting firm to generate fake invoices for architectural services. We wash the stolen church money through your LLC, pay off the bookies, and I will give you a $70,000 cut to walk away from Zuri. I lowered the phone, the sheer breathtaking magnitude of the evil washing over me. The $50,000 stolen from Harrison was just emergency bridge capital. The real crime, the massive federal-level felony, was the systematic embezzlement of my father's congregation. Chantel had a crippling underground gambling addiction. She had drained the life savings of thousands of faithful churchgoers to pay off international bookmakers. The entire plot to destroy my marriage was nothing more than a strategic, calculated distraction. By publicly humiliating me and branding me a manic, bitter failure, she created a massive family crisis that drew all the attention away from her own life. She used my heartbreak as a smokescreen while she set up Jamal to be the ultimate fall guy, using his fake company to launder the stolen church donations. Tiara stood completely frozen against the wall, watching my face process the information. She clutched the baby tightly, her eyes wide with mounting terror. She knew she had just handed me the weapon to annihilate everything. "Please," Tiara begged, her voice a pathetic, trembling whisper. "I just wanted a safe place to live." I did not know she stole from the church until it was too late. Jamal said we were in too deep to back out. "Do not ruin us, Zuri." I did not waste a single second listening to her cowardly excuses. My thumbs moved with rapid, practiced efficiency across the phone's screen. I highlighted the entire chat log, the digital ledgers, the voice notes, and the wire receipts. I tapped the export function, bypassed the standard email protocols, and routed the entire multi-gigabyte cache directly to my firm's heavily encrypted offshore servers. A green progress bar flashed across the top of the screen. 20%, 50%, 90%, complete. The evidence was now locked behind military-grade encryption, completely out of Chantel's reach, out of Jamal's reach, and permanently in my possession. I locked the phone and tossed it casually onto the plush velvet sofa. It bounced once and landed face down. Face. "You chose to swim with sharks, Tiara," I said, my voice as cold and absolute as a winter storm. "Now you are bleeding in the water and you are surprised they are circling. I highly recommend you pack whatever you can fit into the trunk of your car and disappear before the federal investigators kick this expensive door off its hinges." I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit, my stilettos clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Tiara let out a loud, agonizing sob, collapsing onto the floor, clutching the infant as the reality of her total destruction finally took hold. I stepped out into the quiet, climate-controlled hallway and let the heavy apartment door slam shut behind me, sealing her inside her ruined life. As I walked toward the private elevator, my own phone vibrated sharply in my hand. I flipped the device over. It was an automated calendar notification flashing brightly against the lock screen. "Event reminder tomorrow night. Grace Fellowship Church, 25th Pastoral Anniversary Gala. Location: the Grand Ballroom, downtown Atlanta." My parents were hosting a massive, highly publicized banquet to celebrate my father's 25 years of leadership. The entire congregation would be there. Local politicians would be there. Harrison Blackwood would be sitting at the head table right next to his perfect, pious wife. They were preparing to throw the biggest, most expensive celebration of their own righteousness. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face as the elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. The stage was already set. I drove straight from Tierra's luxury apartment complex to the towering glass and steel monolith of my downtown corporate office. It was late on a Sunday evening, and the financial district was entirely deserted, leaving the skyscraper silent and imposing. I bypassed the security desk with my biometric clearance, rode the high-speed elevator to the 50th floor, and locked myself inside my executive suite. I booted up my secure multi-monitor workstation and immediately uploaded the encrypted files I had extracted from Tierra's phone. I needed to build a narrative so absolute, so meticulously documented, that even a team of high-priced defense lawyers could never dismantle it. I started with the digital ledgers Chantel had foolishly photographed. The header on the banking portal was unmistakable. It bore the gold and navy blue crest of Grace Fellowship Church, specifically designating the new sanctuary building and expansion fund. My father had spent the last 4 years relentlessly demanding tithes from the working-class families in his congregation. He stood at the pulpit every single Sunday, pressuring people who could barely afford their rent to empty their pockets, promising them a magnificent state-of-the-art community center as a physical monument to their faith. And he had put his perfect, pious golden child daughter in charge of managing the massive construction escrows. I pulled the church's public financial disclosures and crossed them with the hidden digital ledgers. The discrepancy was astronomical. Chantel had not just skimmed a little cash off the top to fund her lifestyle, she had completely hollowed out the foundation of the church. I traced the offshore wire transfers mapping the exact chaotic trajectory of the stolen capital. She had set up an elaborate web of fraudulent vendor accounts issuing massive recurring payments for architectural rendering and structural engineering services that completely did not exist. The money flowed directly out of the church escrow, washed quickly through Jamal's newly minted Apex Consulting, and immediately vanished into a labyrinth of international accounts controlled by bookmakers in Macau. Chantel had an underground catastrophic gambling addiction. She had gambled away the faith, the sacrifices, and the life savings of thousands of people. The entire plot to destroy my marriage was nothing more than a strategic, calculated distraction. By publicly humiliating me and branding me a manic, bitter failure, she created a massive family crisis that drew all the attention away from her own life. She used my heartbreak as a smokescreen while she set up Jamal to be the ultimate fall guy, using his fake company to launder the stolen church donations. I spent the next 14 hours locked in that office, fueled entirely by black coffee and cold, righteous clarity. I compiled every wire receipt, every forged signature, every fake invoice, and every incriminatory text message into an ironclad, legally binding forensic audit. The document was a masterclass in financial execution. By the time the sun began to rise over the Atlanta skyline, the trap was perfectly set. My cell phone vibrated violently against the polished wood of my desk, shattering the quiet focus of my office. A single voicemail notification glowed on the screen. It was from my father. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, tapped the icon, and let his booming, authoritative voice fill the room. He did not sound like a loving parent or a compassionate pastor. He sounded like a dictator desperately trying to maintain control over a rapidly collapsing empire. Zuri, his voice snarled, vibrating with absolute unhinged rage. I do not know what kind of demonic jealous spirit has taken hold of you, but you have caused enough destruction for one lifetime. Chantel is completely inconsolable. Harrison left the house yesterday in a completely unacceptable state of confusion and anger, all because you decided to spew your bitter, psychotic lies at my dinner table. You are actively trying to destroy your sister out of pure spite. He paused, taking a heavy, ragged breath before his tone grew even darker. Tonight is my 25th pastoral anniversary gala. It is the crowning achievement of my entire life, a night to celebrate my legacy, my church, and the flawless image of this family. You are expressly forbidden from attending. Do not come to the venue. Do not attempt to show your face. You are an agent of chaos, and I will not allow your miserable existence to cast a shadow over my celebration. I have personally given your photograph to the private security team at the Grand Ballroom. If you step one single foot onto that property, you will be treated as a hostile trespasser. You will be physically restrained, humiliated in front of the entire congregation, and dragged out in handcuffs. Stay away from us, Zuri. You are no longer welcome in our light. The voicemail clicked off, leaving the room completely silent again. I did not feel a single ounce of rejection. I did not shed a tear over being officially banned from my own family. I actually smiled. My father truly believed he was banishing a disgraced, jealous daughter to protect his perfect party. He had absolutely no idea that he had just threatened a senior forensic auditor holding the keys to his permanent ruin. At exactly 8 in the morning, the heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom swung open. Marcus Sterling and Evelyn Vance, the two senior managing partners of my forensic accounting firm, walked in. They were ruthless, brilliant, and entirely devoid of sentimentality. They valued one thing above all else. They protected the firm's massive banking clients from financial liability at all costs. I had called an emergency review, pulling them away from their scheduled morning briefings. They took their seats at the massive granite table, looking at me with expectant, sharp eyes. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I slid two thick, bound copies of my completed forensic audit across the polished granite. I need you to review the catastrophic exposure on page 4, I said, keeping my tone perfectly clinical and detached. The client is First National Bank. The asset in question is the commercial mortgage for Grace Fellowship Church, specifically the construction escrow tied to their new sanctuary expansion. Marcus frowned, flipping the heavy cover open. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, her eyes instantly scanning the highlighted columns of missing capital. It took them less than 3 minutes to grasp the sheer magnitude of the catastrophe. Evelyn looked up, her expression entirely stripped of its usual corporate calm. "Zuri, this escrow account is completely empty," Evelyn stated, her voice tight with disbelief. "There is a deficit of over $800,000. The bank is financing a massive construction project that has absolutely zero liquid capital backing it. The church is in technical immediate default on their commercial covenants." Marcus flipped rapidly to the appendix, his jaw tightening as he examined the routing numbers. "And these vendor payments," he muttered, tracing a line with his gold pen. "They are completely fraudulent. The capital is being washed through a domestic shell company and dumped into offshore gambling syndicates. This is not just a commercial default. This is a massive, coordinated embezzlement scheme. This is a federal financial crime." "Exactly," I confirmed, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the granite table. The primary signatory on the escrow account is Chantel Blackwood, the pastor's daughter. She has been systematically draining the church's assets to cover an underground gambling addiction. The bank's exposure here is completely unacceptable. If the congregation discovers the money is gone before the bank secures the property, the public relations fallout will be an absolute nightmare. The federal authorities need to be involved immediately, but First National Bank must move first to freeze all remaining assets and assume total legal control of the church's commercial titles. Marcus closed the folder, his eyes locking onto mine with a cold, predatory gleam. He recognized the absolute brilliance of the audit. He recognized that I had just saved the firm's largest banking client from a multi-million-dollar disaster. The fact that the perpetrators were my own blood relatives was entirely irrelevant in this room. We dealt in numbers, not family loyalty. "This is exceptional work," Zuri, Marcus stated firmly, standing up from his chair. "First National Bank needs to issue an immediate, legally binding freeze on every single account associated with Grace Fellowship. We need to serve a notice of default to the pastoral board today." Evelyn nodded in agreement, sliding her copy of the audit into her sleek leather briefcase. "The pastoral board is hosting a massive public gala tonight," Evelyn noted, checking the public registry on her tablet. "The entire executive committee, including the primary signatories, will be in one room. It is the perfect opportunity to serve the default notices and execute the asset freeze before they have a chance to shred any physical documents or attempt to move any remaining capital." "Zuri, Since you spearheaded this investigation, the firm is granting you full executive authority. You will act as the lead representative for First National Bank. Go to the gala, serve the documents, and shut the operation down completely. I left the boardroom with the absolute weight of corporate and federal authority resting squarely on my shoulders. I drove back to my condo, my mind perfectly clear and my pulse remarkably steady. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the Atlanta skyline. I walked into my massive walk-in closet, completely ignoring the racks of elegant flowing evening gowns that women were expected to wear to a high society pastoral gala. I was not going to a party. I was going to a crime scene. I pulled out a custom-tailored midnight black tuxedo suit. The cut was razor-sharp, immaculate, and entirely uncompromising. I slipped into the crisp white silk shirt and fastened the dark jacket, feeling the heavy structured fabric settle over my shoulders like a literal suit of armor. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe style, completely stripping away any trace of softness or vulnerability. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. My father had banned his broken, jealous daughter from attending his crowning achievement. But Zuri, the disgraced daughter, was not going to the gala. I picked up the heavy leather portfolio containing the bank's execution orders. I was going as the lead auditor for the bank. The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Plaza Hotel was a monument to manufactured holiness and unchecked vanity. Crystal chandeliers the size of small vehicles hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a brilliant, blinding light over 70 round tables draped in heavy gold linen. At the center of the room stood a massive 6-foot ice sculpture carved into the shape of the Grace Fellowship Church logo, slowly dripping freezing water into a silver basin. A 12-piece live jazz band played smooth instrumental gospel music from a raised stage, completely masking the sound of thousands of dollars being wasted. My father, Pastor DeAndre, was in his absolute element. He stood near the VIP section at the front of the ballroom holding court, with the mayor, 2 city council members, and a state senator. He wore a bespoke midnight blue velvet tuxedo jacket that caught the light perfectly for the event photographers circling the room like hungry vultures. He was flashing his trademark blinding smile, accepting handshakes and backslaps, playing the role of the humble shepherd while actively basking in the adoration of his flock. He had built his entire identity on this exact image, the untouchable righteous patriarch who commanded respect and absolute obedience. He had no idea that the ground beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes was already gone. On the opposite side of the ballroom, Chantel was delivering an Oscar-worthy performance. She was draped in a backless emerald silk gown, her neck adorned with a staggering diamond tennis necklace that caught every flash of the cameras. She was surrounded by the senior church mothers, laughing delicately and pressing her hand to her chest in feigned humility as they praised her devotion to the ministry. She was playing the perfect pious daughter, accepting compliments on her tireless work managing the church expansion project. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her performance was mesmerizing. She was smiling at women whose life savings she had personally wired to underground gambling syndicates in Macau. Harrison stood a few feet away from her, nursing a neat glass of scotch. He was not smiling. The easy, confident posture he usually carried had completely vanished, replaced by a rigid, uncomfortable tension. He was watching Chantel with narrowed, deeply suspicious eyes. The seed I had planted in his suit pocket yesterday had clearly taken root. He was a brilliant architectural developer who managed millions in assets. It would not take him long to trace the fraudulent $50,000 wire transfer. He was currently standing in a room full of people praising his wife, and he was realizing he did not know the woman he had married at all. The heavy brass-trimmed double doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom were currently closed, guarded by 2 large private security personnel my father had specifically hired to keep me out. They were expecting a hysterical, weeping woman in a cheap dress trying to crash a party. They were completely unprepared for what actually walked through the doors. I pushed the heavy brass handles open with a firm, simultaneous thrust. The thick wood swung wide, hitting the magnetic stoppers with a loud, resounding thud that cut through the smooth jazz music. I stepped into the blinding light of the ballroom. I was not wearing a pastel gown. I was not shrinking away from the judgmental stares of the congregation. I was wearing my custom-tailored midnight black tuxedo suit. The cut was razor-sharp and unforgiving. My hair was pulled back into a severe polished style. I carried a thick, heavy stack of bound financial ledgers in my left hand, the physical manifestation of my family's total destruction. Flanking me on either side were Marcus Sterling and Evelyn Vance. They did not look like party guests. They looked exactly like what they were: apex predators in the financial sector. Marcus wore a charcoal double-breasted suit, his expression carved from absolute stone. Evelyn wore a severe navy skirt suit, her eyes scanning the room with the clinical detachment of a coroner inspecting a morgue. We did not walk like a family. We moved in a tight, synchronized formation, an execution squad marching directly across the gold carpet. The effect was instantaneous. The low hum of polite conversation near the entrance abruptly died. The silence rippled outward like a wave spreading from table to table as heads turned to stare. The congregation knew me as the quiet, awkward, recently divorced daughter, who never quite measured up to Chantel's sparkling standard. They were staring at a woman they did not recognize. The sea of expensive gowns and tuxedos physically parted for us guests, stepping backward to clear a path down the center aisle of the ballroom. Chantel turned her head at the sudden drop in noise. Her eyes locked onto me, and the color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. Her jaw went slack. The diamond necklace around her throat suddenly looked incredibly heavy. She took a stumbling, frantic step backward, bumping hard into a catering cart. The crystal glasses rattled violently, but no one looked at her. Every eye in the room was locked on my approach. My father was mid-sentence, laughing loudly at a joke the mayor had just made. He noticed the sudden, suffocating silence in the room and turned his head. His smile instantly froze. The blood rushed to his face, his complexion darkening with a sudden, explosive surge of absolute fury. He saw the black tuxedo. He saw the two strangers flanking me. He saw the stack of ledgers in my hand. He thought I had brought divorce lawyers to make a public spectacle regarding Jamal. He thought I was here to throw a temper tantrum and ruin his flawless 25-year legacy in front of the local politicians. DeAndre abandoned the mayor without a single word of excuse. He practically sprinted across the ballroom floor, moving with heavy, aggressive strides designed to intercept me before I could reach the center tables. He forced a wide, completely plastic smile onto his face for the benefit of the watching cameras, waving casually to the crowd as if he were simply walking over to greet a late arrival. But as he reached me, his body blocked my path entirely. He stepped directly into my personal space, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me into stopping. Marcus and Evelyn stopped precisely one step behind my shoulders, their faces impassive, waiting for my lead. My father leaned in, keeping his face turned toward the audience so they would only see his beaming pastoral smile. But his eyes were dead, and his voice was a vicious, venomous hiss directed entirely at me. "I told you explicitly never to show your miserable face here, Zuri," my father snarled through his gritted, smiling teeth. "You are an absolute disgrace to this family. You are a bitter, jealous failure of a woman, and you are trespassing on private property. I have 4 armed security guards walking up behind you right this very second. You are going to turn around, take your little divorce lawyers with you, and walk out of those doors quietly. If you say one single word, if you cause 1 ounce of drama in front of the mayor and my congregation, I will have you physically dragged out of here in handcuffs, and I will ruin whatever is left of your pathetic life." He reached out his heavy hand, clamping down hard on my shoulder, his fingers digging into the structured padding of my tuxedo jacket, attempting to forcefully turn me around toward the exit. He expected me to flinch. He expected me to shrink under his authority, just as I had done every single day of my childhood. I did not flinch. I did not move. I simply raised my right hand and effortlessly swatted his heavy grip off my shoulder. The movement was so smooth, so entirely dismissive, that my father actually stumbled back a fraction of an inch in pure shock. He looked down at his own hand, completely bewildered that I had dared to physically reject his control in a public space. The fake plastic smile melted off his face, replaced by genuine, unfiltered panic. He realized in that split second that he had absolutely no power over the woman standing in front of him. I looked him directly in the eyes. I did not raise my voice, but I spoke with a carrying, crystalline clarity that ensured the mayor, the state senator, and the entire front row of VIP tables could hear every single syllable. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored jacket. I pulled out my heavy metal corporate identification badge stamped with the federal banking seal and clipped it smoothly onto my lapel. From my other pocket, I withdrew a thick gold-embossed envelope bearing the official crest of First National Bank. "I am not here for the prime rib, Pastor," I stated, my voice echoing coldly through the silent ballroom. "I am here representing First National Bank. We need to talk about the building fund." The heavy metal of the corporate identification badge gleamed under the massive cascading crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom. My father stared at the federal banking seal as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. The blustering dictatorial rage that had fueled his stride just seconds ago instantly evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sickening confusion. He opened his mouth to speak, to issue another command, to somehow reassert the absolute authority he had wielded over me my entire life. But the words completely died in his throat. First National Bank held the mortgage to his entire empire. I was no longer his scapegoat daughter. I was the physical, uncompromising embodiment of his total financial ruin. From across the gold-carpeted expanse of the ballroom, I saw the exact moment Chantel realized the dynamic had fatally shifted. She had been watching the interaction from the VIP section, undoubtedly expecting our father to quickly usher me out the side doors, while she maintained her flawless posture among the senior church mothers. But when she saw DeAndre freeze, when she saw the two severe corporate executives flanking me step forward with heavy leather-bound ledgers, panic finally shattered her pious facade. She abandoned her audience mid-sentence, completely ignoring the bewildered looks of the congregation members surrounding her. She gathered the heavy silk fabric of her emerald gown in her fists and began moving rapidly toward the raised stage at the front of the room. She was entirely desperate. She thought if she could just get to the microphone, if she could just command the room's attention with her rehearsed tearful tribute to our parents, she could manipulate the crowd and drown out whatever scene I was about to cause. I did not wait for my father to recover his voice. I simply stepped around him, leaving him completely immobilized and hyperventilating in the middle of the aisle. Marcus and Evelyn followed perfectly in step, our tight corporate formation cutting through the sea of horrified guests. The 12-piece live jazz band, sensing the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere, allowed their smooth music to trail off into a confused, discordant halt. The silence in the massive ballroom became absolute, suffocating, and incredibly heavy. Chantel practically leaped up the carpeted stairs to the stage. Her diamond tennis necklace bounced erratically against her collarbone, the jewels catching the spotlight in a frantic display of stolen wealth. She snatched the primary microphone from its chrome stand, her breathing ragged, her eyes darting fiercely toward my steady approach. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chantel announced. Her voice echoed through the massive ballroom, artificially loud, pitched high, and trembling with forced enthusiasm. "If I could please have everyone's attention, we are going to begin the pastoral tribute just a little bit early tonight." I look around this beautiful room, and I simply cannot wait another moment to honor the incredible, flawless legacy of my father and the grace of our church. The congregation politely turned their attention to the stage, completely unaware of the absolute devastation bearing down on them. I kept walking. The distance between the center of the ballroom and the stage felt agonizingly short. The whispers began to ripple through the seated guests. They recognized me, but they did not understand what they were looking at. I was the quiet, awkward, recently divorced daughter who never quite measured up to the family standard. Now I was striding past the velvet-roped VIP tables in a razor-sharp tuxedo, flanked by white corporate sharks carrying the kind of ledgers that sent executives to federal prison. As I approached the edge of the stage, I looked up toward the elevated sound and lighting booth at the very back of the room. I locked eyes with the lead audiovisual technician. I had not spent my entire day just compiling the financial audit in a vacuum. 3 hours before the gala began, acting under the full legal authority of First National Bank's emergency receivership protocols, I had paid a personal visit to the hotel's technical staff. I had provided them with a secure flash drive and a very specific set of legally binding instructions regarding the property they were broadcasting. The hotel management had complied, instantly terrified of crossing the bank that also financed their own commercial real estate. I gave the technician a single sharp nod. The signal was received. I bypassed the decorative floral arrangements and walked directly up the side stairs of the stage. My stilettos clicked loudly, rhythmically, against the polished wood. Chantel saw me coming, and her eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. She gripped the microphone with both hands, stepping forward to physically block my path to the center of the stage. "Security!" Chantel hissed into the microphone, her panic bleeding through the speakers and amplifying across the silent ballroom. "We need security at the stage right now. We have an unauthorized guest disrupting the program. Please remove her." Before the confused private guards lingering near the exits could even react, a high-pitched, piercing shriek ripped through the front of the room. It was my mother. First Lady Yvonne was on her feet at the central VIP table. She was wearing a massive, custom-designed silver hat and a gown covered in thousands of hand-sewn sequins. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, vicious outrage. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at me, completely abandoning her polished, soft-spoken church persona. "Remove her!" my mother screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Get that jealous, bitter woman out of this venue immediately. She is ruining this night. She is ruining our family. Do not let her take another step toward my daughter." Two large security guards in dark suits immediately moved forward, stepping into the aisle to intercept me. Marcus Sterling did not even blink. He smoothly withdrew a thick stack of federal injunction documents from his breast pocket and held them up, stepping directly into the path of the advancing guards. "Federal asset freeze and emergency receivership orders," Marcus stated, his voice carrying the absolute, uncompromising weight of the law. "Anyone who interferes with this audit is obstructing a federal financial investigation. I strongly suggest you step back." The guards took one look at the embossed federal seals, exchanged a terrified glance, and immediately backed away, raising their hands in surrender. My mother let out another strangled gasp of horror, collapsing back into her seat as she realized no one was going to stop me. Harrison Blackwood, sitting right beside her, remained entirely motionless. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle feathered in his cheek. He was staring at Chantel, his eyes dark and calculating, finally understanding that his wife was standing at the epicenter of a massive fraud. I ignored the chaos below and stepped directly into Chantel's personal space on the stage. She was trembling so violently that the microphone in her hands was generating a low, static hum through the sound system. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, begging me to back down, to accept my traditional role as the defeated outcast. She tried to turn her shoulder, attempting to shield the microphone from my grasp. "You cannot do this to me," Chantel whispered desperately, the sound barely picking up over the speakers. "I am your sister. I will give you whatever you want. Please, Zuri." I reached out and wrapped my hand directly over hers, gripping the cold metal of the microphone. My grip was absolute. I leaned in close to her ear, so close I could smell the expensive imported perfume she had purchased with stolen tithes. "Your show is permanently canceled, Chantel," I whispered back, my voice completely devoid of mercy. I effortlessly pried the microphone from her rigid fingers. Chantel stumbled backward, her emerald gown twisting around her ankles. She looked out at the massive crowd, her perfect image shattering into a million irreparable pieces in real time. I stepped forward, taking the absolute center of the stage. The massive ballroom was so profoundly quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning units and the clinking of silverware from the catering carts in the hallway. Thousands of eyes stared up at me in shock and confusion. My father was still standing frozen in the middle of the aisle, his chest heaving. My mother was hiding her face behind her sequined hands, Good evening, Grace Fellowship. I said, my voice smooth, steady, and echoing with absolute authority through the state-of-the-art sound system. My name is Zuri. Most of you know me as your pastor's daughter. You know me as the woman whose marriage recently failed. You know me as the subject of the tragic gossip that has been carefully circulated through this congregation for the last 6 months. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the guilty faces in the crowd. But tonight I am standing before you in a completely different capacity. I continued, holding the microphone steady. I am not here to celebrate a legacy. I am a senior forensic auditor representing First National Bank, and it is my professional duty to inform you that this church is currently in catastrophic commercial default. As the words left my mouth, the massive 30-foot projector screen suspended behind the stage instantly flickered to life. The AV technician had executed my orders flawlessly. The carefully curated emotional slideshow of my father's 25 years of ministry completely vanished. The screens went entirely black for one agonizing second. Then a massive high-definition image illuminated the entire ballroom, casting a harsh, glaring light over the silent congregation. It was the digital bank statement for the new sanctuary building and expansion fund. The document spanned the entire wall behind me, magnified so large that the numbers were unmistakable even from the very back of the room. It displayed the intricate, undeniable web of fraudulent vendor payments, the shell companies, and the offshore routing numbers. And right at the bottom of the massive ledger, glaring with undeniable catastrophic finality for the entire church to see, was a massive financial deficit of over $800,000, highlighted in bright fluorescent red. The brilliant high-definition projection cast a harsh red glow over the terrified faces of the congregation. The silence in the grand ballroom was no longer just heavy. It was absolute suffocating paralysis. Hundreds of church elders, community leaders, and faithful members sat frozen in their gilded chairs, their eyes locked onto the massive deficit glaring from the 30-foot screens. $800,000. Gone. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream, and I did not shed a single tear. I held the microphone with a relaxed, steady grip and spoke with the deadly surgical precision of a professional auditor presenting a finalized report to a board of directors. "The numbers you are looking at do not lie," I stated, my voice slicing through the dead air. "This is the official unedited ledger for the Grace Fellowship New Sanctuary Building Fund. For the past 18 months, the primary signatory of this account, Chantel Blackwood, has been systematically siphoning your tithes, your offerings, and your life savings. $300,000 of your hard-earned money was wired directly to offshore betting syndicates in Macau to cover her catastrophic underground gambling debts." A collective horrified gasp ripped through the ballroom. A senior church mother in the second row pressed her hands to her mouth, tears instantly spilling over her cheeks. But the embezzlement did not stop there. I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room and landing directly on my sister. When the bank began asking questions about the construction delays, Chantel needed a distraction. She needed a smokescreen massive enough to hide her federal crimes. So she stole an additional $70,000 from this holy sanctuary fund. She routed it through a fabricated shell company called Apex Consulting, and she used that stolen money to pay my husband to initiate a fraudulent divorce, hoping my public humiliation would keep everyone distracted while she balanced her illegal ledgers. The ballroom erupted. The sheer scale of the depravity broke the spell of silence. Deacons were shouting, women were weeping. The mayor, sitting at the front table, immediately stood up, signaling to his security detail that he needed to evacuate the premises before his political career was tainted by the fallout. My mother completely snapped. First Lady Yvonne lunged forward from the VIP table, her heavy silver hat knocked askew, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged fanaticism. She scrambled up the stage stairs, her high heels catching on the carpet, and threw herself toward me, desperately trying to snatch the microphone from my hands. "Do not listen to her!" My mother shrieked, her voice echoing wildly through the room. "The devil is using her! A dark, jealous Jezebel spirit has taken hold of my youngest daughter. She is trying to destroy this holy ministry with fabricated lies, Security removed this demon from the stage. I simply sidestepped her frantic lunge. Evelyn Vance, standing like a sentinel at the edge of the stage, firmly caught my mother by the arm, locking her in place with a grip of steel. My father rushed the stage next. Pastor DeAndre was sweating profusely, his custom blue velvet jacket clinging to his broad shoulders. The veins in his neck were bulging. He snatched the microphone from my hand, his chest heaving as he turned to face his completely disillusioned flock. He was a cornered animal desperate to save the flawless empire he had built over 25 years. "Please, everyone remain calm," DeAndre boomed into the microphone, forcing his pastoral cadence over the shouting crowd. "What you are seeing on these screens is a terrible, unfortunate internal accounting error. It is a software glitch in the bank's processing system. My daughter Chantel is a devoted servant of the Lord. We will have our internal finance committee review this glitch tomorrow morning and clear up this entire misunderstanding. The devil is simply trying to test our faith on this glorious anniversary night." Down on the ballroom floor, Chantel was executing her final, desperate performance. She collapsed against Harrison, burying her face in his tuxedo jacket, weeping massive theatrical crocodile tears. "You have to defend me, Harrison." Chantel sobbed loudly, clinging to his lapels. "Zuri is insane. She is completely obsessed with ruining my life because her own marriage failed. She hacked into the bank and fabricated these documents to frame me. Please tell them she is lying. Tell them I am innocent." Harrison Blackwood did not wrap his arms around his weeping wife. He stood perfectly still, his tall frame rigid, his face completely drained of color. He looked down at Chantel's manicured hands, gripping his jacket, and then he looked up at the glowing red numbers on the massive projector screen. He was a brilliant developer. He understood the mechanics of wire fraud better than anyone in the room. He had already connected the dots to the $50,000 missing from his own private family trust. The puzzle pieces had locked together, and the realization was an absolute cold-blooded fury. Harrison reached up and peeled Chantel's fingers off his jacket, discarding her hands with a look of absolute unfiltered disgust. He stepped around his sobbing wife, walked up the stairs to the stage, and approached my father. The sheer terrifying presence of the billionaire developer commanded immediate authority. The crowd's uproar instantly dialed down to a breathless, waiting hush. Harrison did not ask for permission. He reached out and forcefully ripped the microphone from Pastor DeAndre's sweating hand. "It is not an accounting error," Harrison stated, his voice a low, lethal baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. "It is theft." He turned his head slowly, locking his dark eyes onto Chantel, who was currently trembling at the foot of the stage. "She did not just steal from this congregation," Harrison continued, every word landing like a hammer strike in the silent room. "She stole $50,000 from my private corporate trust account to fund the initial phase of this cover-up. And she forged my legal signature to do it." Chantel let out a hollow, agonizing wail. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed onto the gold-carpeted floor of the grand ballroom, her emerald silk gown pooling around her in a pathetic heap. The perfect, pious daughter was gone. The golden child was entirely obliterated, leaving nothing but a exposed felon sobbing into the floorboards. Near the back of the ballroom, lurking by the prime rib carving station, a figure in a cheap, ill-fitting suit suddenly bolted for the service exit. Jamal had foolishly shown up to the gala, undoubtedly planning to corner Chantel in person to demand his remaining $20,000. He had watched the entire digital execution unfold from the shadows. He had seen his fake company Apex Consulting blasted across a 30-foot screen in front of state politicians and banking auditors. He realized his entire life was over, and instinct took over. But as Jamal threw his weight against the heavy wooden service doors, they did not budge. 3 large men in dark suits stepped out of the catering corridor. They were off-duty Atlanta police officers specifically hired by my father to work private security for the VIP event. They had heard every single word of the presentation. One of the officers grabbed Jamal by the collar of his cheap suit, slamming him face first against the heavy wooden doors. The distinct metallic ratcheting sound of steel handcuffs echoing from the back of the room cut perfectly through the stunned silence of the crowd. Jamal thrashed helplessly, his desperate whining entirely ignored by the arresting officers. Harrison held the microphone steady, his eyes still locked on his weeping wife. "I will be contacting my corporate attorneys in the morning," Harrison announced to the room, his voice completely stripped of emotion. "I am officially pressing federal charges for the forged wire transfer. I suggest the elders of this church do the exact same." The 24-hour clock began ticking the moment the gala collapsed. The next morning, the city of Atlanta woke up to an absolute media firestorm. I sat in the plush leather chair of my corner office on the 50th floor, holding a warm cup of black coffee, watching the morning news cycle play out on my mounted flat-screen television. The headline splashed across the bottom of the news broadcast was "Uncompromising Megachurch Embezzlement Scandal." The church board of elders had convened an emergency midnight session following the gala. Facing total public ruin and the immediate threat of federal asset seizure by First National Bank, they had acted with ruthless self-preservation. Pastor DeAndre was indefinitely suspended, stripped of all pastoral authority, and banned from the church premises pending a full criminal investigation. Chantel had been formally indicted by federal prosecutors just before dawn. The quiet chime of my office intercom interrupted the news broadcast. My assistant informed me I had a visitor. Harrison Blackwood walked into my office. He was dressed in a sharp slate-gray suit, looking exhausted but remarkably clear-headed. He did not look like a broken man. He looked like a surgeon who had just successfully amputated a necrotic limb. He sat down in the chair opposite my desk, resting his hands on the polished wood. "I came to apologize, Zuri." Harrison said, his voice calm and deeply sincere. "I sat at your family's dinner tables for 3 years. I watched them treat you like a secondary citizen. I watched them elevate Chantel to sainthood, and I was entirely blind to the toxic, manipulative reality of their dynamic. You were the only honest person in that entire house, and I am deeply sorry I did not see it sooner." I set my coffee cup down, nodding slowly. "You were blinded by a carefully constructed illusion, Harrison. They spent decades perfecting it. You survived the collapse. That is all that matters now." Harrison offered a grim, satisfied smile. "I filed the divorce papers at 8 o'clock this morning. I froze every single joint account, revoked her access to my credit lines, and had my security team change the locks on the Buckhead estate. She is currently sitting in a holding cell, waiting for a bail hearing she cannot afford. She is left with absolutely nothing." We sat in quiet professional solidarity for a moment. Two people who had been targeted, betrayed, and ultimately emerged completely victorious. Harrison stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and offered me a firm, respectful handshake before leaving my office to rebuild his empire. The final pathetic gasp of my family's legacy arrived at 8 o'clock that evening. I was standing in the kitchen of my luxury high-rise condo, pouring a glass of sparkling water, when the heavy knock sounded at my front door. I checked the digital security monitor mounted on the wall. My father and mother were standing in the carpeted hallway. They looked absolutely destroyed. My father was not wearing a custom velvet jacket. He wore a rumpled gray sweater. His shoulders slumped, his face visibly aged by 10 years in a single night. My mother was completely stripped of her sequins and her massive hats. She wore no makeup, her eyes swollen and red-rimmed from hours of hysterical crying. The proud, untouchable patriarch and his righteous first lady had been reduced to desperate begging shells of their former selves. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open, leaving the security chain attached. I stood in the narrow gap, looking at them with total emotional detachment. "Zuri, please," my mother sobbed, pressing her hands against the doorframe. "Please, baby. You have to stop this. You have to call the bank and drop the audit. They are going to send your sister to federal prison. They took your father's church away. You have proven your point. You won. Please just save our family." My father looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "Zuri," he rasped, his voice a broken, hollow echo. "We are begging you. She is your blood. Show her some mercy." I looked at the two people who had stood by and watched me suffer my entire life. I looked at the parents who had allowed me to be emotionally abused, who had eagerly aided in my public humiliation, who had smiled while my husband walked out the door and blamed me for the destruction of my own life. They were not here because they loved me. They were here because I was the only person left with the power to save them from their own consequences. I set my glass of sparkling water down on the console table. I looked directly into my mother's weeping, desperate eyes. "You made it very clear at the hospital, Mom," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and absolutely final. "I am not family. I am just the auditor." I reached forward gently, removed her hands from the door frame, and pushed the heavy wooden door shut. The deadbolt clicked into place with a loud, satisfying finality, locking them out of my life forever. I walked across the expansive hardwood floor of my living room and slid the glass balcony doors open. The cool evening breeze swept in, carrying the distant, energetic hum of the city below. I stepped out onto the wide terrace, leaning against the glass railing, and looked out over the glittering, endless expanse of the Atlanta city lights. I took a deep, unrestricted breath. The suffocating weight of my family's expectations was permanently gone. The agonizing burden of trying to earn their impossible love had been completely eradicated. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the betrayed, inadequate wife. I was a senior executive, completely financially untouchable, and standing entirely on my own foundation. I watched the city pulse with life beneath me, surrounded by the quiet luxury of my own success, and for the first time in 32 years, I was at total, absolute peace. True worth is not defined by the approval of toxic family members who blindly dismiss your potential, but by the quiet resilience and unyielding determination you cultivate within yourself. When you stop shrinking to fit into spaces where you are not valued, you completely reclaim your power. Financial independence and personal boundaries are the ultimate shields against manipulation. Sometimes the most profound revenge is not loud or destructive. It is simply thriving on your own terms and refusing to be a victim of their narrative. Walk away from toxicity to find your true power. Please share your stories below today